2020 Lane County Board of County Commissioners morning meeting. And I'm just going to start with my normal housekeeping information. So for the public that's watching the meeting, when you're registered for the meeting, you are registered in our system as attendees. Attendees are webinar participants who are simply viewers of the meeting, an audience member. Your microphone and your webcam are automatically muted as attendees. However, there will be a time during the meeting that will open it up for public comment. And when that time comes, if you wish to participate, we'll ask you to raise your virtual hand to be recognized, and you should see a hand icon on your device and just click it once. When public comment begins, our moderator will call names, and when your name is called, you'll be unmuted and given 3 minutes for public comment. When your 3 minutes is up, you'll be able to go back into muted status and the next name will be called. We'll try to give, we'll try to give everyone who wishes to present public comment an opportunity to speak, but please note in the event that there are more people wishing to speak than the allotted time allows, I might need to limit the number of speakers or reduce the time per speaker. Speakers could also be selected randomly to participate in public comment. We haven't had to do this yet, and hopefully today we'll be able to hear everybody who wishes to speak. So with that, we'll start off with item number 1 on our agenda, adjustments to the agenda. Are there any adjustments from anybody? All right, I don't hear any, so we'll move on to emergency business. Is there any emergency business? I don't see emergency business, so we'll move on to the public comment period. So if you're interested in having a public comment for us, please raise your virtual hand now, and I'll toss this over to our moderator.
Thank you, Chair Buck. At this time, I do show 3 people are attending as the public, but I only see 1 hand up. Mr. Mcallister, I will call on you and I will unmute you and start your timer, and you may begin public comment. It looks like you are self-muted, Mr. Mcallister. There you go.
Good morning, commissioners, members of the public. My name is Chris Mcallister and I live in Springfield, District 2. I just wanted to share my appreciation as we move forward organizing for the winter earlier than ever before, and the teams who are really rallying behind trying to find solutions have been thinking creatively and constructively and collaboratively. And so I'm really excited about the opportunities we have coming before us. That said, we need a lot more spots available quickly as summer has opened up and we have a bunch of displaced people who are trying to maintain COVID safety distancing and access to hygiene options. So I really implore our community to try and find solutions for the disabled families, the displaced families with dogs, and the veterans who do not have access to safe, clean water. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your services. And I look forward to working together with everybody.
Thank you for your public comment, Mr. Mcallister. At this time, if anyone else would like to make public comment, you may raise your hand now. I would like to state for the people who have logged on, this is the only public comment time during this morning's session. So if you did call in to speak, now would be the time to do that. I do not see that anyone else has their hand raised. I will wait one more moment to see if anyone else would like to speak. And Chair Buck, I do not see any more hands raised, so I believe that is the end of our public comment.
Okay. Thank you for commenting. We'll go to Commissioner's response and remonstrance. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. Today, I came to the board meeting thinking about last week's board meeting. We heard an excellent report by Dr. Altucker about the systemic racial injustices at the Youth Services Division. We had a rather poor turnout for our board listening session on racial inclusion. And in thinking about the board meeting, I want to apologize for two things. One, although there wasn't any malice or ill intent, my asking our staff to talk about their experiences as women of color was a bad idea. The reason for this is that I'm a white male with a lot of privilege and power, and it put these three staff members, each one a woman of color, on the spot to talk about their experiences. And this was unfair to them, and I want to apologize to each one of them for that. I also want to apologize for my role in derailing the board discussion by bringing up the experiences of the three staff members and that of other commissioners to talk about their or our experiences with race. I mentioned my immigrant grandparents. Although that might be relevant at some point, the purpose of the discussion was to listen to people of color from the community about the systemic racism that exists now in Lane County. The 5 commissioners are all white people with privilege and will never change the policies of Lane County by simply repeating stories of our own white privilege backgrounds. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other remonstrance or comments? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck, and thank you, Commissioner Sorensen, for saying the words that you just said. I think those are very powerful words, and they will resonate. Thank you. Chair Buck, I'd like to point out something that I mentioned during the remonstrances comment session last week, and that is regarding Lane County's Equity and Access Board. We have an Equity and Access Board. It was formed in February 2017 after quite a bit of work by a task force that reviewed a lot of different options as to how to move forward progressively and emphatically with the equity and access issues in Lane County. The Equity and Access Board meets monthly, and they are dynamic in nature. They look at a lot of different issues. Recently, as I mentioned last week, they sent a letter to our sheriff, Sheriff Cliff Harold, asking for a full inventory of the what are called 1033 items. 1033 items are military surplus that have been given to local law enforcement agencies. And the Sheriff's Department, Lane County Sheriff's Department, as we all know, has received some of these military surplus items. The Equity and Access Board would like the sheriff to provide that inventory by their meeting next week, which is on September 2nd of next week. And as far as I know, I'm not the sheriff's boss by any stretch of the imagination. He's a separate elected official. But as far as I know, he's going to provide that inventory to the Equity and Access Board next week as requested. But my feeling is that we need more than that. And I've actually talked to the sheriff a little bit about this, and he agrees. I've talked to other people that what I would like to ask for, and I'll ask for this later on today during head nods, is a presentation from the sheriff on the items that are in that inventory. These are military surplus items. One of the items that is highly publicized is what is used in the military as an armored personnel carrier. What is used in the Sheriff's Department is a rescue vehicle and or a negotiation vehicle. But what I would like to ask the sheriff to provide is not just the inventory, but how each item in that inventory has been used, how it might be used in the future, and in fact, do we need to keep it in inventory? Now, the items by and large will not be accepted as to be returned to the military. They would have to be destroyed or disposed of some other way. So that would be a part of my request, is how, if we do determine that, if the Sheriff's Department does determine that some of these items are excess, how do we dispose of them? So later on in the day, I'm going to ask for head nods for a presentation from the sheriff at some point, maybe in October. And I would leave that to a discussion between the board officers and potentially the sheriff as to when it would be, but maybe sometime in October, with a full listing of the inventory and a number of checkpoints as to what it is that inventory has been, or may be used for. So that's all I had on that. And once again, Commissioner Sorensen, your words this morning were powerful. Thank you.
Very good. Any other remonstrance or comments for this morning? Commissioner Berney.
Rather than use this to say what is on my mind, I just want to say to Chris Mcallister, Chris, the fact that you are here and presenting means you are here. And I've been following your health, and I'm absolutely delighted that you're here and appreciate that you give your life to assist others. That's all. Thank you.
Any other comments? I'll just add that when Mr. Mcallister spoke about us coordinating our efforts for housing and shelter this winter earlier than we've ever done before, and that it seemed to be going well. I've heard that from other providers as well. They are very pleased that we've been doing this earlier and in a really coordinated fashion, and everybody's really on a good line of communication. So I appreciate that as well. All right, we will move on to county administration and our COVID-19 response.
Thank you, Chair. And I think Karen Gaffney is with us. I'll just do a quick intro. Last week we had a lengthy update for you. We're not going to go through all the things that we talked about last week. Karen will walk through an update on the 5 areas that we've identified as part of our COVID-19 response plan in Lane County. And I just want to remind folks, we have this plan that is available on our website at lanecountyor.gov. And it's a good high-level breakdown of those 5 areas that we're focused on: containing the spread of disease, ensuring healthcare providers, first responders, and hospitals have what they need, minimizing economic impacts on businesses and individuals, providing public information and guidance, and preparing for the fall and winter. So I will turn it over to Karen to provide an update on each of those 5 for the board, and then we welcome your questions.
Good morning, Chair Buck and Commissioners. And I also wanted to remind you and the public that we also have a version that's suitable for laminating that's out there with those 5 areas on it. That's right, if you want to keep that with you. So my plan this morning is to just quickly walk through updates in each of those areas. And then, as always, I'm happy to answer any questions or discuss anything related to COVID that's on your mind this morning. I will start by giving you the numbers as we traditionally start. We do, as of the end of yesterday, we had 12 people in the community who we consider to be infectious, which brings our total case count since the beginning of the pandemic to 659. 2 of those people are currently hospitalized and 5 people have passed. The other important number, I think, for us and the community is our total number of negative tests in the community is now over 50,000. As of end of day yesterday, we had 50,678 negative tests that we were notified of in the community. So we continue to do a really great job of testing, and that will be a part of our ongoing success. So I want to start with that first area, which is containing the spread of disease or flattening the curve. Lane County, in the last report from the Oregon Health Authority, we had a 1.1% positivity rate for our testing, which compares to 5.4% at the state level. That's a decrease for us of 0.5 percentage point from last week, which is good news. And in terms of our new cases, that case rate per 100,000, which is the other indicator that we have on our dashboard for school reopening, our rate was 10 in the last report, which is a decrease by 7 from the prior week, which is absolutely going in the right direction. And the state of Oregon came in at 48, and that's a decrease for statewide from 4. So again, we hit that 10 marker, which is exciting for us as we get ready to allow more options for schools in thinking about the fall. Our work in disease investigation and contact monitoring continues. As you know, the health authority indicators countywide look at are we able to follow up on every case within 24 hours, and how many of those cases are linked to another known case. And in the last round of data, we were able to follow up on 100% of our cases within 24 hours, which exceeds the state benchmark of 95%. And we had 28% of our cases that were not traced to a known source, So again, that meets that metric, which is good news for us. Yesterday, we had a total of 84 people under monitoring in the community, which is down significantly from our prior numbers. And again, that's linked to how many new cases we have and how many people are infectious. Also want to talk a little bit about testing. We know that that's an important marker for us to follow. The goal we've set for ourselves is to do at least 500 tests a week. And we continue to exceed that. In the last full week of testing numbers and results that have come in, we were averaging 963 tests per day. So that's on a 7-day week. Our numbers are a little less on the weekends. So we're feeling good about that and definitely closing in on that 1,000 test a day benchmark. We are continuing to do reservoir or sentinel testing as our public health program. And this week we project probably about 220 tests for the scheduled events that we have coming up. We have 3 focus areas this week. We continue to work with Lane County Corrections system, not necessarily. So these numbers are about that overall system and a focus on residential reentry. So that's sponsors and the Community Correction Center. So we'll be doing corrections work. We're out at the Mohawk Fire Station on the 27th with a focus on rural and Latinx communities, and at the Salvation Army in Springfield on the 29th with a focus on our Latinx communities. So that's number one, a big focus for us. And then I'm going to quickly go through the remaining 4. Number 2 is healthcare providers and hospitals making sure people have what they need. And I will say that there's not significant change in terms of PPE. We continue to monitor that, and requests have been at a fairly low level, which signals to us that our healthcare providers and hospitals are able to access their supply chain, given our current level of need in the community. Number 3 is minimizing impacts on businesses and individuals. We continue to focus efforts on processing, along with the nonprofit community, processing energy assistance and rental assistance applications. So that continues to move forward in getting those checks into people's hands and getting bills paid, which is exciting for us. And there have not been significant changes on our Lane County grant program since last week when I reported with that collaboration with community lending work. So that continues to move forward as well. Area 4 focuses on public information and guidance. We talked last week about how we continue to do 2 press conferences a week with Jason Davis, our public information officer. And in each of those, then we follow up with a Spanish language press release or press conference as well. And I just learned today that in addition to Spanish, that we are doing a weekly press event in Mom. So we are expanding our language accessibility in terms of that public information so that we really are serving the whole community. A big part of our effort has been on social media and digital media. This last week, I'm sure each of you certainly follow our social media presence on Instagram and Facebook. Our focus has been on a health literacy word of the day campaign, which has been well received and helps people with their ability to think critically about news as it comes out. If we help people understand terms like isolation and quarantine as we move forward, there is a little bit of a challenge around message fatigue, and that's a piece that our public information officer, in collaboration with our Joint Information Center, are working to overcome. Also want to let you know that we count our Facebook page views and our website hits, and those are exceeding 1,000 a day on both of those platforms. And so it definitely is meeting the needs of a number of people in our community as a way to receive information. And then finally, the 5th area is a focus on the fall and winter. You talked during remonstrance about work around planning for people who are homeless. We continue to be engaged in that work. particularly as it relates to those people who are at highest risk for COVID. And it's exciting to us, the collaboration with the community on those plans. Schools have also been a big piece for us this last week. As of noon yesterday, we had received more than 90 blueprints from schools on their way to the Oregon Department of Education. Again, just as a reminder for the public, our role is to review the public health section of those plans and provide feedback to the districts. And we have our team that continues to do those reviews and forward that feedback to districts. As of yesterday, we had 21 schools who were doing some planning around bringing back grades K through 3 in some format. Again, those plans have to go to the Department of Education and get review and approval there before any on-site education can occur. And then finally, thinking about the fall, we've done work this last week around vaccinations. Dr. Ludke pulled together his medical advisory group, which includes leaders from our local hospital systems, our provider practices, and our insurance payers, as well as support from the state health authority. And vaccinations was the topic for that 2-hour session last week, both thinking about the flu and then starting the planning for COVID. We have great engagement from our community in thinking about both of those. And we've really set our internal target to get everyone their flu vaccine by Halloween, which will give us an opportunity both to test some strategies for vaccination clinics that will help us with COVID. And it also will clear the decks so that when the COVID vaccine becomes available, we have the resources ready to deploy to get that into people's arms. And then I would say the University of Oregon has also been an important topic, not only for us here at Public Health, but I know the broader community. And they plan to make their announcement this week about how they will proceed. And again, I tip my hat to the really fantastic collaboration. The U of O has been in constant contact with us, and we look forward to continuing that through the rest of the fall and winter. So I think I'll leave my update there, and then I'm happy to answer any questions the board might have.
Okay, Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. I've got 4 questions. I don't know how quick they'll be, but as I was listening, I wrote them down. One sort of doesn't relate to your report, but just wondering if you know what the status is of the U of O approval of the U of O's saliva test.
When I spoke with their incident commander this morning, that was still in process. They are continuing their planning as if that approval will come through, and certainly doing the rest of the planning of both with us and with other key partners about how best to deploy that resource once it becomes available. I know that will be addressed in their planning document that comes out this week as well.
Great, thank you. We had public comment last week about PPE for in-home care providers. You spoke about hospitals and other institutional as far as PPE goes. Are we involved in providing in-home care providers PPE, or is that a state level responsibility?
Thanks for that question, Commissioner Bozovich. We have not been charged with, in our clearinghouse, providing PPE to individuals or personal care providers, such as were described at the meeting last week. The state has pushed that out through the agencies that regulate those systems. So for instance, in developmental disabilities, we absolutely work with the personal support workers and care providers who serve people with developmental disabilities. And then the aging system or seniors in disability would be the ones who are working with the providers in their system to get access to PPE.
Thanks. When you talk about vaccinations, are they developing a priority list for who would get the vaccinations first? As that it does seem that there probably may be a limited rollout of those.
Yes, they absolutely are, Commissioner Bozovich. We talked with Mimi Luther, who's the vaccine coordinator at the Oregon Health Authority this last week, and the feds have begun to release what that priority list looks like. I don't know that it's finalized yet, but we would anticipate it will be similar to other vaccine rollouts where we look at first responders and healthcare providers would be in the first wave, other at-risk populations, and then as more vaccine becomes available, it moves more into the general population.
Great.
So I would anticipate it'll be a system like that.
Great. And then my final question, as we talk about preparing for fall and winter, has the city of Eugene identified any sites for alternative or traditional shelter?
Chair Buck and Commissioner Bozovich, that's a great question, and I don't have the answer to that. I don't know if the county administrator might have more information about how some of that work has been happening. I know there's been a joint county-city team that has been looking at properties, but I don't know exactly which properties are in the hopper.
Yeah, that's an accurate statement that we do have a joint team that's working on identifying. I think as we've talked about, we're looking at these more alternative, scattered site, smaller density shelter solutions given the COVID concerns. So looking at a large expo hall at the fairgrounds is not something that we're considering for this winter. So just to put that in your mind of what we're looking for. So we've said we're going to need a number of locations, a number of sites, and good coordination there. There is a team working together, and actually I spoke with the Eugene city manager and our joint housing strategist, Sarai Johnson, last week, talking about the coordination between our entities, both Eugene and Springfield in Lane County. So we're wanting to bring Springfield to the table as well, and actually talking about creating this joint emergency operations team that will be coordinating with the other emergency operations functions, but focused on the shelter components of the work. So we're doing a lot of coordination. To your specific question, Commissioner, I'm not aware of those, but what we can do is for next week, bring back a list of any potential sites that have been identified. But I can just reiterate that there is a lot of coordination happening, and I think you're hearing that through various circles to date.
Great, thank you. Those are my questions.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. The other day, I had a constituent call me and said that she was unable to get a COVID-19 test for her mother in her late 50s, early 60s. And then I decided to look on other communities' websites, and I happened to see the one on Los Angeles where they have drive-up testing at Dodger Stadium and also walk-in testing at a place called Clinic Romero. And all you have to do is get on their website and request a time to be in line, either physically in a line or in a driving line, and then you get your COVID test. I'm wondering, do we have anything like that in Lane County where people who are concerned about their test and their need for a test can go to a drive-up location? Do we have anything like that?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, that's a great question. We have at McKinsey-Willamette, they have done drive-up testing. So in terms of that modality, yes, I believe that's available. You do need to have a doctor's order to get a test there. So it's not, I think some of what you're talking about in other communities might be more testing on demand, that as frequently as someone wants to be tested, if they're just curious, they can drive up and get a test. We do not have that available in this community. And again, I think that's the opportunity that comes with being able to have a different testing platform. And Commissioner Bozovich's earlier question about saliva testing, I would imagine when that becomes available, then the possibility for us to be doing much more broadly available testing on demand becomes a tool in our toolbox. So I know it's a little bit of a long answer. Yes, you can drive up and get a test, but in order to do that, you need to have a doctor's order, which typically means you have to have some reason that you think you might be positive. So either you're symptomatic or you've been to a hot spot, something like that.
Yeah, the constituent in that I'm mentioning, her mother had come from a hot spot to Eugene and was herself in several risk categories. And the constituent is a nurse, and she found it odd that you need to have a doctor's permission to have a COVID-19 test in Lane County, where in other parts of the country, the patient looks over the list of symptoms, and if they're in the category where it might indicate they need to be tested, then they would make that decision themselves. And having a doctor and the difficulty of getting to see a doctor, and how few people, well, let's say many people don't have a doctor. So that's a pretty significant barrier to wide-scale testing. I'm just curious, have you looked into what other jurisdictions are doing, like Los Angeles County, where they already have this kind of testing? I understand Nashville had it as well. Why don't we have it, and why are we waiting for the U of O to invent it when it's apparently already been invented elsewhere?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, I know testing is important and popular topic right now, so I'm glad we're getting some time to talk about it. I think there's a couple drivers. Yes, we certainly have looked at what other communities are doing. What we know is in some of the communities that you mentioned, those are particular hotspots, and so a lot of the testing supplies have been diverted to some of those communities for good reason, because they're hotspots, and so they need to be doing much more broad testing. In our community, we have PCR testing, which does require particular supplies, and that supply chain is limited. So we have continued to prioritize access to testing for people who have some reason to believe they are ill, which is what we were just talking about, and to do our public health sentinel testing. So where we have high-risk populations, we are going out to the community, and for those tests, anyone can show up, and we encourage everyone in that population to show up. During my report, I listed several places where the county will be hosting testing events this week that are particularly targeted for rural communities, because we know there's more limited access to healthcare services in our rural communities, and to our Latinx community, because we know that there have been overrepresentation of COVID in our communities of color, and we want to make sure that those communities have access to testing. So that's how we are prioritizing access to testing in this community. Again, I would say we're doing more than 1,000 tests most days, averaging 7 days a week, close to 1,000 tests. So I feel good about the reach that we have in testing. And could we do more? Yes, absolutely. It's an interesting side note. I was talking with one of my peers at a 7 a.m. meeting this morning about wanting to make sure the community understands that testing is not the same as a vaccine. So once we're able to test, it doesn't mean that if someone can get tested, for instance, 3 times a week, that then they don't need to socially distance or wear masks or do any of the other preventive measures that we're talking about. Testing is important, and it's just one part of our strategy to keep people safe and contain the spread.
Could you update us on any public information efforts that Lane County Public Health is making to inform people about the ways to protect themselves and protect everyone else from the spread of this disease?
Chair Buck and Commissioner Sorensen. We have a number of strategies in our public information arena. The first is that twice a week, our public information officer hosts a press conference where the media is able to submit their questions and get answers directly from our public information officer. Of course, he also answers other questions 7 days a week, but we do those formal press conferences that result in earned media. We have someone who's specifically responsible for social media efforts. So we use both our Instagram and Facebook accounts to push out information related to preventive strategies, such as the ones you mentioned, and we send those out every day. And as I mentioned in my report, we're getting more than 1,000 hits a day on both Facebook and to our website, where so Facebook is more of a push, and I would say our website is where people actually come to get that information. And then finally, last week I talked to you about our paid media. We've been augmenting our earned media with some paid media and have chosen specifically to focus on issues of the importance of masking as the focus for those bus boards and billboards that are out in the community.
I wanted to offer the phrase "better 6 feet apart than 6 feet under" as a message for our public health effort.
Okay, thank you. I will share that, Commissioner Sorensen.
Commissioner Burney.
You're going to make me follow that last soundbite? I would like to say, thank you, Chair. I would like to say that we're all human and we're all doing our best, but honestly, I don't think we could be better served by the team we have, led by Ms. Gaffney and Dr. Ledke and Mr. Mokrahysky, but truly the work that's being done, engaging different community members. I know y'all were at the U of O that related to contact tracing recently. So you have absolutely my highest level of support after being one that was very critical initially, as we all were. So thank you for that. Just a couple of questions. One is, Karen, if you don't mind, you mentioned, I think, August 27th and 29th with testing specifically aimed at the Latinx community, and they were both in Springfield. Could you repeat the details of those if you wouldn't mind?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Burney, I'm happy to do that. We will be at the Mohawk Fire Station on the 27th, and the focus there is on rural and Latinx communities. And then at the Salvation Army in Springfield on the 29th with the Latinx focus. And I will say, for those in the public who might be watching, we do post these events on our website. So again, if you go to the county's main webpage, you'll see a yellow bar across the top that talks about our coronavirus website. Click on that link and it will take you to our COVID-19 information section, and you can get up-to-date information about where our testing events are scheduled.
Thank you, Karen. And next question. Last week, you mentioned a number of K-3 schools. This week, I think you mentioned 21. If I heard that correctly, we're going to be opening in one form or another. And I asked you out of how many public and private elementary schools, and if you could share that with us so we had a sense of perspective. Do you have that information?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Burney, I'm sorry to say I do not have. I did not follow up and find out how many elementary schools we have in Lane County. I can tell you that we've received 90 blueprints, and of those, 21 schools have talked about bringing some version of K through 3 back under the county exemption allowance. But I don't know what percentage of elementary schools that is. I'm sorry I did not follow up on that. I will make myself a note to do that.
Well, I know it's the absolute highest priority, but if you do have a chance, I would appreciate some sort, when you give us data, especially related to schools, maybe, I don't want to tell you how, I can't, but maybe some kind of spreadsheet, but something that gives us a perspective of how many schools, of the different levels, how many public, how many private, so that we have a good sense. Because I would guess right now, amongst parents and working parents and young people, all of whom we have in our family, this is such a stressor. You know, people just don't know what to do, or if they feel comfortable or safe moving forward. When you were giving feedback to districts, did you find that the health department had to provide direction based upon planning so that you could intervene, or did you find school districts had that knowledge and really didn't need your guidance?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Burney, that's an interesting question. I think we've talked about how a couple months ago, the health department, in collaboration with the ESD, began hosting twice a week call-in opportunities for public and private schools to assist them with their planning efforts. So I would say the responses have reflected a real continuum. We have some schools who have been getting up-to-date information and working closely with us from the beginning, and their plans really reflected that. And we had some schools, particularly private schools, smaller schools, who I think did not plug in at all to what the resources are that were available, and their plans reflected those gaps in information. And so we're needing to give them, more detailed and significant feedback, not only about what our public health concerns might be, but really helping them understand the larger guidance that Department of Ed has been pushing out as well. So I think it's a continuum.
Thank you. And I just want to thank you again. Thanks, Chair. This is my last little piece. Every evening on the news, I see that map that shows the country, and it shows that Oregon has, is the best color we could be in terms of what it's coding vis-a-vis cases and deaths. And I'm acutely aware that Lane County's numbers are much better than the state average. So I thank you for doing your best to keep us all safe.
Thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Ms. Gaffney, Ms. Mcallister, I have two questions. One's going to be for you, Ms. Gaffney, and one's going to be for you, Ms. Mcallister. Truth is, I've got close to 100 questions, but I don't think this is the best venue to ask all of the questions because the answers can be quite detailed. People have a great many sources for information, and the sources that they have cause a great deal of consternation quite often because they're inaccurate, incomplete in their reporting. And I hear all the time from people I know and love, and people I know less and love less, that there's conflicting information that's causing a great deal of anxiety. My question for you, Ms. Gaffney, and I'm going to be tagging along with Commissioner Sorensen's question. By the way, I love his questions because as an attorney, he always knows the answer when he asks the question. And you provided the answer in good detail, Karen, to the question that I'm going to ask. I'm looking right now at our gold barred 2019 novel coronavirus COVID-19 website. It's huge. The links on there are I don't know, they're probably close to 25 or 30 different links on there. And my question, Karen, is how confident can I be that just about every question I have to ask can be found, the answer can be found on this website?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Farr, you can be confident that we are trying to make sure that every question you could think of is on there. What I will say is we continue to staff our call center, and the staff in the call center are both answering phone calls as well as responding to emails. So in the event that you or anyone in the community has a question that we haven't contemplated an answer for, I really encourage people to email that to us or give us a call, because we're constantly updating the website and our FAQ list to be responsive to what the emerging concerns and questions are in the community. So we will track down answers and post those in response to the community.
Very, very good short answer, Ms. Gaffney, because as I look at it, the FAQ list is robust and it's dynamic. It changes on a regular basis. So many of the questions that I see on there are questions that people are asking me, so I can direct them to your answer. So they don't have to hear my words. They can hear somebody that they can trust. And quite frankly, I trust Lane County's health department tremendously. I believe that we have, based on the numbers that Commissioner Burney just cited, that Oregon is the best in the nation, and Lane County is, and I'll recite some evidence of this, the best in the state. I trust what we are doing, and I trust the responses and the answers, and I'll always guide people to our website to see if the questions are answered right there. Because as I look on our website, you give links to other organizations that I believe we can trust. The Oregon Health Authority, State of Oregon COVID-19 Resources, Center for Disease Control, World Health Organization, and others, as well as many local sources. So that's a direction I will always try to guide people and try to find my answers there before I belabor Lane County staff, which is already under intense workload, before I belabor them with additional questions. And so thank you very much. That's a great answer to my question. I will continue to have confidence in that gold bar at the top of Lane County's website. People, you can click on that and go pretty much any place you want. Mr. Mcallister, my second question is for you. And it is prefaced by a message you sent to the staff last week, citing Lane County versus Oregon statistics. And I enjoy looking at it, that Lane County is let's see, 9% of the total population of Oregon, yet our numbers are way lower than 9% in all of the cases, or except in the case of testing, where we're much higher. On this day, you reported that we conducted close to 50,000 tests. 10% of all tests in Oregon have been conducted in Lane County, ahead of the 9% population that we have. 2.7% of all cases in Oregon are from Lane County, less than the 9% of total population that Lane County is. 1% of deaths is Lane County. So all the numbers support what Commissioner Burney just pointed out, that Lane County is excelling in all the areas. And also points out what you, Ms. Gaffney, stated, we still have to get better. We still have to do more testing. We still have to find greater ways to respond to the public need. My question for you, Mr. Mcallister, is regarding the COVID-19 response plan. I love it. I love the format for it because it reminds me of this format, which is a Lane County strategic plan. My question for you, Mr. Mcallister, is we have what amounts to a strategic plan regarding COVID in this hand. And in this hand, the Lane County strategic plan, which I've been very clear that I thrive on strategic plans. When I was with Oregon, on the board of Oregon Food Bank, when I was on the board of Selco, when I was with Jerry's, when I was with Food for Lane County, we relied on the strategic plan as we do in Lane County. My question, Ms. Mcallister, is how is this strategic plan embedded inside of this strategic plan, which is the Lane County strategic plan?
Thank you, Chair and Commissioner Farr. I would say that, we've done a lot of planning. We talked about this with COVID-19 and broader strategic planning in the organization. And the value of that planning effort, to me, is really about creating focus, clarity, alignment, and coordination of resources so that we all, from the board to our staff to the public, all understand the things that we're focused on, and that we leverage our time, our effort, our resources around those things. So that's the value of developing these plans, which we have in place. As important as having, identifying what our strategies and goals and measurements are going to be to create that focus and that clarity and that alignment, as important as that is, it's really important for us also to be flexible and nimble in responding to the situation on the ground each day. And so we try to strike that balance between, let's be clear about what our overarching priorities and goals and measurements are going to be, but let's also allow for flexibility to respond to the needs of the moment. Let's not be so constrained by what we put on a piece of paper that we can't adapt and adjust as the situation does. So that's a long way around your question, but just to paint the picture of what the purpose of these plans are, that we put a lot in it, but we also want to say that's not just because a plan says something or doesn't say something, doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only thing we are going to do or we're not going to do. So you'll see, I mean, what I would say directly to your question is in our Lane County strategic plan, we have these 4 strategic priorities, and Safe Healthy County is the first one where we talk about protecting and enhancing the safety and health of Lane County residents with a focus on enhancing and managing resources, improving access to, prevention programs, and collaborative initiatives. So our COVID-19, which you held up also, one page kind of summary response plan follows that similar format and fits right into this first strategic priority of maintaining a safe and healthy county. So it's all there. Now we do plan, we'll bring back to the board when we have an update on the strategic plan, and we'll make sure we have an item specifically identified for our COVID response efforts. But I just wanted, I took a minute in the beginning just to paint that overall picture that plans are really important, but we're focused on results. And if we're so constrained by just identifying and pointing out where things are on the map, we're sort of losing the ability to navigate the situation in the moment. Does that help answer your question?
That is actually a perfect answer, Mr. Mokrahayski, and one that I anticipated that you'd give us. And Ms. Gaffney, our community health improvement plan, for instance, is embedded in our strategic plan, and our public works transportation plan is embedded in there. So our strategies are all well formed and all consolidated and combined. That gives me confidence in what I said earlier, Ms. Gaffney, that I can tell people that we have a plan, and that if they want details, they can go to our website, Lane County's website. And I believe that the strength of our planning process here in Lane County is one of the reasons we are doing such a superb job in response and comparison regarding COVID-19. So thank you very much. Once again, you have, Chair Buck, I have confidence now that I can direct people to our website in order to give them an accurate picture of the questions and the answers. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll just add one question for Ms. Gaffney, and then we'll keep our agenda moving along. We were able to meet with Senator Wyden, and Dr. Luckey was able to join us this week over at the University of Oregon. And I was hoping that you might be able to summarize the opportunity and the challenges we have with the program that we were showing him.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Yes, it has been a very busy week, and I appreciate you reminding me to give that summary too. As you know, we've partnered with the University of Oregon on a number of items since the beginning of the pandemic, and one of the exciting places where that partnership has taken root is around our contact tracing. And I won't take time here to talk about how important it is that we have sufficient contact tracing, except to say that, you know, that's one of the most important tools in our toolbox for containing the spread of disease, is very quickly being able to reach out to everyone who has been a contact of someone who's positive. And then also isolation and quarantine for people to contain the spread of disease. So we have contracted with the University of Oregon. We did the planning in the spring, and the contract itself went into effect July 1st. To use some of our CRF funds to pay the university to staff up their Corona Corps, which is an opportunity for them to give real world experience and leverage the power of many of their students, including particularly those students in their global health program, to be able to gain skills and make a positive difference during what hopefully will be a once in a lifetime event when people reflect, what did you do during the pandemic? These students have been on the front lines making those calls and working closely with the health department to make sure that we're effectively doing quarantine and isolation in our community. So the Student Health Center at the U of O is the host for their Corona Corps. And they run the same software package that we have here at the health department. We feed them names of people who need to be contacted, and they enter that data and keep us informed and really provide significant capacity for us in the community. So that's work that they can manage so that our staff at the health department can focus on other important response elements. And then when our case numbers go up, we really have that surge capacity both here and at the University of Oregon to do that important work. So it was nice. Senator Wyden was in town on Friday and took time not only to recognize those efforts, but to be able to talk to some of those students and hear a little bit more about their direct experience in that work.
Thank you. And I wanted to point out that for this particular program, most of the counties rely on the state to provide the contact tracing and that bucket of money to do that. Now, we have gone above and beyond that and started using our allocated funds to help support this particular effort, which I think has had a great deal of impact on our lowered numbers. And that bucket of money, either one, will discontinue after December 30th. And so it was important that we conveyed that to our senators as they're working for an additional congressional CARES package for us. So that I think was a really great meeting. And I want to make sure that the public knew about that. Commissioner Sorensen, and then we'll move on our agenda.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to touch briefly on the strategic plan references. Now, in December of 2019, we updated this strategic plan, and at least on our website, it's there as it stands. My point in bringing up the strategic plan in conjunction with the COVID-19 response wasn't to criticize what the county is or isn't doing on the COVID-19. It's really to point out that there are many things that have had to go away that we committed to in our strategic plan that have gone away. As a practical matter, they've gone away. But our strategic plan, is a long-term document, and the public, in looking at our strategic plan, and staff would see, for example, that we have under robust infrastructure item 3B3, we will be developing a lane event center business plan to attract new events and increase revenue. Item 3C1, we will fund and construct a new justice center. We're not doing those things that, to the best of my knowledge, because of the severe economic impact, as well as perceived voter attitudes about funding government projects. And so, to me, it's not so much that we are doing the COVID-19. We could obviously mention that in our strategic plan, but the things that we're not doing, because we can't do all things. We can't be all things to all people. And that's the purpose of a strategic plan. So I know Mr. Mcallister is well aware of all this, and I just want to encourage the board, the staff, and everyone to be as transparent as we can about amending our strategic plan when we have time, given the fact that we're in a COVID-19 emergency pandemic. But I do think that we need to make those adjustments so that we're all well aware of what our strategic plan says we're going to be doing. Thanks.
Okay, let's move on to item 6, our consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Burney, second by Commissioner Bozovich. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to item 7, County Council announcements. Is Mr. Dingle with us? Well, not hearing him, we will skip that. And if he's back on, maybe we'll try to get there a little later. So we do have a 10 a.m. time certain. Might want to mute if you're not speaking. Thank you. So we will go on to item 8A, which is a presentation on the Affordable Housing Action Plan for Lane County. And with us is Karin Knudsen, project lead with Better Housing Together, and Judy Williams, our strategy and integration manager. Take it away.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me fine? Okay.
Yes.
Good morning, commissioners, Chair Buck and commissioners. Thank you so much for your time and for having us. We're really excited to bring this topic to you. I'm just going to do a quick tee off an introduction, and then I'll turn it over to Karin Knudsen. So, talking about the strategic plan just a moment ago, this is one item. Affordable housing was a critical item on our strategic plan several years ago. And so as it's been on our strategic plan, about a year and a half ago, we started to tackle this item and it's a big topic, and we knew we couldn't do it alone. And so we invited conversations with our neighboring jurisdictions. We invited Eugene, Springfield, the experts, people in housing that are already doing this work, and had a couple meetings to kind of determine what direction we might be headed and who might best take the lead. Recognizing this pretty quickly, we didn't quite have the capacity or the knowledge to take that on, but we did have experts in our local community. And so we chose to partner with Better Housing Together, and Karin Knudsen here is the project lead with Better Housing Together, and they do phenomenal work in this area and have done quite a bit in our state and community. And so we started this collaborative effort a little over a year ago, and February Karin did a great presentation, kind of a preliminary report back in February about the direction that we were headed. And then COVID happened, and there were some delays in kind of the community engagement piece, but we stuck through it. And Karin's here to do a final presentation of what the action plan looks like and what those recommendations are. So thank you so much to Karin, and I will just turn it over to you to take us through the presentation.
Thank you, Judy, and good morning, commissioners. Thank you all so much for having me, and by extension, Better Housing Together, here today to talk with you about this work. As Judy said, and I want to be sure that you all can see my screen okay, and everything is visible to you right now. I can't see you anymore, so I'll be flying blind a little bit, but
yes,
is
we
everything?
can see the first slide.
Perfect. Again, my name is Karin Knudsen, and I'm the director of Better Housing Together. And we, as Judy mentioned, were asked just about a year ago to assist the county in looking at our local crisis in Lane County, the housing crisis that we face as a community, and to leverage the relationships and expertise of our partner network and community capital in order to help advance our work and come up with some new ideas, look for new connections, identify partnerships, and paths forward that we think have potential to support our community in addressing the housing crisis that we face. Better Housing Together is now almost, I think, 50 partners strong. We need to update this graphic because the logos are getting too small to see who anyone is. But we are the only community-based multi-sector housing advocacy organization based in Lane County. And we work collaboratively to increase housing affordability, diversity, and supply. We always work on those three issues together because together they are helping us to move in the direction that we need to go. As Judy mentioned, this work in the Housing Action Plan relates to the Lane County Strategic Plan and this question of how we can increase housing options to reduce the incidence of homelessness and increase affordability. And so in looking at that question, Better Housing Together was asked specifically to consider really kind of take an outside the box approach to this work to look at all ideas and both inside and outside of our control or the county's control, to look at land use restrictions, factors affecting affordable housing, strategies for unincorporated areas, and also revenue generation. As Judy mentioned, we did need to revise our timeline. We originally were expecting to come back to see you all in mid-May. I think May 14th or 15th was our original target for this presentation. But of course, all sorts of timelines and focus needed to change as we were responding to COVID as a community. And now here we are today in the end of August to share this work. So the Affordable Housing Action Plan that we have put together is really focused on 5 primary components, and I will offer really high-level summary of this information today, and then we can have a conversation, I hope, about some of the information that is here and what we might think about in terms of next steps. But those 5 primary components are, of course, research and analysis of the local context and housing need, community and partner engagement process to generate some of the recommendations and strategies that are included in the plan to meet different needs, an overview of what those different categories of recommendations and actions might be, and then what we describe as a housing affordability framework, which is a graphic that I'll show you in just a couple of minutes to help people to understand how it is that some of these issues connect to one another and how specifically our new efforts are needed to help create space for new types of housing, new types of partnerships, and housing that can be delivered to our community that is closer to the financial capacity and means of our community. So speaking of that and our local context and housing needs, so you all, of course, know well the TAC report and this map of our homeless service system. One thing that I like to say in framing this presentation and this information to anyone that we have talked with is that, of course, we see the work of this action plan as a complement to the TAC report and the recommendations in that report. We know that the lack of attainable and affordable housing in our community, a great need for more permanent supportive housing in our community, and incredibly low vacancy rates within our community and undersupply are part of what create the particular challenge of homelessness that we face. And so, of course, we see housing as the solution to homelessness. Other points of context that we connect to have to do with housing cost and price. And you all might remember this diagram on the left, a very simplified model of housing price and cost put together by Eco Northwest that really is meant to illustrate all the different points that the county and public agencies can influence and participate in that price of new housing. And then on the right, a recent graphic that we put together in partnership with our colleagues at Oregon Employment Department, looking at what our housing permits in Lane County per 100 new residents has been recently. And the big takeaway from this graph on the right is that we have been underbuilding by about 10% on average every year for the last 10 years. And what that means, of course, is that housing costs are, housing is more scarce, costs are then higher. And the image on the left from the Out of Reach report describing what minimum wage would be necessary in order to afford a 2-bedroom home, a rental home, and that in 2019 in Oregon, that was 3 cents shy of $23 an hour. Now we're fortunate that our minimum wage has recently increased, now $12 an hour, but still quite distant from what is necessary in order to be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment on those wages. Building on that same information, looking at the household income distribution from 2012 to 2016, the orange bar in this graph shows where Lane County sits relative to the city of Eugene and also Oregon overall. And of course, what you can read from this is about 50% of our Lane County income distribution and population earning less than $50,000 a year, and moving close to 3/4 of our Lane County residents earning less than $75,000 a year. The renter cost burden, given the high cost of housing and the low wages that go with it, is over for is over 30% cost burden for 54% of renters in Lane County, and over 50% cost burden, which is known as severely cost burdened, for 30% of renters in Lane County. All of that information meant simply to illustrate, or shared simply to illustrate, that there is work that needs to happen on the policy side in order to actually shift the delivery of housing units to come closer to the capacity of our community. A really simple, someone was just asking me the other day, what is the most important takeaway that you hope the commissioners have from this action plan? And it's something that I know all of you are well aware and hold as a goal yourselves for our community, and that Lane County be a place that workers here can afford to live, and that we need to do work on our policies and look for new programs and pilots in order to make that more possible. This 2020 summary of household size and area median income in Lane County, a couple of highlights to understand about our local context. We're an average household of 2.3 people in Lane County. The number of one person and two-person households is to significantly grow in the next 20 years. And that has a lot to do with the aging of a very large generation in these next 20 years, and also a very large generation that will be still likely in one and two-person households behind it. So that sort of millennial boomer confluence that is really creating a challenge in terms of the types of housing that we have available, given the size of household and also the funding that people have to attain it. The average annual wage in Lane County is $48,671. This is the average wage from the Oregon Employment Department. It's almost exactly aligned to 100% area median income for Lane County at $49,000. But the big takeaway from that, and understanding that most of our community is sort of living in this range between 60 and 100% AMI, while paying for housing costs that are significantly beyond what they should be paying given their income. So I had mentioned that we're working on an affordable housing framework for Lane County. And that is the graph, the bar chart that you see in front of you here. Part of the goal of this graphic is to help both policymakers, but also the public, to understand what it is about the income levels and wages and occupation opportunities that we have in this county, what it is about those things that interfaces with housing supply, or when that interfaces with housing supply, and where we actually need price points to move towards and wages to move towards in order for housing and total cost of living to be more affordable in this county. So a couple of high-level takeaways from this bar chart, and we can talk more about it at the end if you all would like to, is to understand, again, there's that average annual wage at $48,671 right near the center. Also right just about at 100% AMI for a single person household. But when you look at our occupational groups within Lane County, what becomes quickly apparent is that we have about 75% of our average occupations earning less than 100% AMI. What that means is that over the sort of course of a career, we have many people in our community who are working at less than area median income, of course, but for the duration of their occupational group's opportunity. So they're not working in a job, say as a preschool teacher, for example, making $29,300 a year. That individual's housing cost is an affordable monthly housing cost would be $805 a month. There's no housing being delivered to the market that person could afford, and creates a significant problem when we're thinking about all of the occupations that are a part of our economic development plans and community resilience and health, and the housing that is not available affordably for those people. And that story really is true for so many of the occupations that make up the workforce of Lane County. We are relatively low wages. We are below the average wage in every occupational group relative to the state. We have some occupations that pay higher wages than the state level, but on average, we are lower wage earning and still have very high cost of housing. So a piece to this puzzle that Better Housing Together has been thinking a lot about, because of course, oftentimes in our housing discussion, there's a sort of pure market conversation, which is about, just what the private sector is delivering. And most of what the private sector is delivering, bearing in mind that undersupply note that I made earlier, is really at the top end of the market, right? There's a few opportunities to deliver new housing to the market, little land available for new housing. And so the people who are building housing are building for at the top of the market to earn, sort of the greatest return possible on a relatively small amount of opportunity. At the other end of the bar chart, there's sort of the pure public sector response, which is thinking about our low-income housing tax credit projects, community development block grant, home fund projects, any permanent supportive housing projects where really that housing is being delivered to market primarily by the public sector and through partnerships and funding from the federal and state levels and local levels to create that housing. And that, typically also is working at the other end of the spectrum. 0 to 30% AMI, of course, are most vulnerable members of the community who absolutely rely on that housing and shelter. In some cases, certainly reaching up to 60% AMI, but in general, relatively little housing and relatively little housing policy that is working on supplying new housing into at an affordable level to the community, which is the place where that new housing would have the greatest opportunity to influence other costs of housing in the community. And we can talk a little bit more about that if you would like. So there's this small note right at the bottom that is meant to sort of pique your interest, and we will talk more about this and be doing more work on this front in the year ahead, we hope. But to understand, what is the size of home that can be accomplished given, cost per square foot construction estimates and a $100,000 mortgage, for example. So if I'm a minimum wage worker and I would like to be able to afford my monthly housing costs, I'm going to pay $625 a month. If I would like to be able to own a home, if there was one that was possible, given mortgage, it would be in the ballpark, between $600 and $700 a month as an estimated monthly mortgage payment. That would be for a $100,000 mortgage, which would translate to a home of about 400 square feet. I mention that because as we're thinking about what kinds of housing options can reduce the incidence of homelessness and increase affordability in Lane County, that question in your strategic plan, certainly the role of smaller housing units, more infill housing units, more land efficient housing, mixed income housing where there is sort of longer term financial sustainability for the project baked in to its pro forma. Those are all in the direction that we need to be moving as a community. And the good news is that that direction also aligns with goals to reduce pollution and energy consumption in buildings and objectives to support the workforce and economic development projects as well. So that is background and thinking about what our local context is and how we might communicate this challenge and the need for some of these policies or ideas to a broader public or to other partners. In terms of the recommended actions in the Affordable Housing Action Plan, these are really in 5 categories, 5 action categories. And those categories are leveraging land, especially public land for housing, pilots and partnerships, trade support and support for the building culture's workforce, rural innovation, and to build capacity. So those are the 5 categories. This image on the right, which I do not want you to try to read, is an action plan matrix summarizing all of those different, all of the different strategies within each of the action categories, the income levels that are assisted by each of the strategies and programs proposed, a brief description of that program, as well as the presumed speed of impact, as well as the scale of impact. And then some notes about other jurisdictions and organizations or partners that the county could learn from in pursuing that work, and an identification of which partners locally would need to be at the table in order to advance those strategies and programs. So walking quickly through these and hopefully still having time at the end for us to talk about this work. In the category of leveraging land, this is something that we talked about in February, has to do with the fact that, you know, there are only so many ways that the counties can significantly influence the cost and price of housing. And one of those ways has to do with utilizing the land that the county has access to or could have access to in order to bring down the cost of housing. Land can be 30% or more of the cost associated with housing. And so this is a significant lever to utilize. The different strategies and programs underneath this action category are to initiate required planning for large county-owned property or properties so that they have done the background work needed to understand their capacity and potential for development, for the county to lead interjurisdictional siting collaboration to prioritize sites for affordable housing, and really to have a robust conversation with our city partners to think about when housing opportunities or RFPs come forward from the state, that we have a whole list of sites that have been prioritized for different types of projects, that we would assess the public-private partnership and public-public development potential on county-owned properties and county-owned properties adjacent to other publicly owned properties, say one of our local cities within the county or smaller communities, to create property development and first right of refusal program to support land acquisition and new housing development. This is one of the strategies that I'll dive into just a little bit, and I'll try to do that with each one of the categories that we look at. To expand the land bank program to 8 to 12 sites so that we are prepared for OHCS or state RFPs and grant opportunities, and of course to pursue transit-oriented development housing partnerships with agencies, certainly our transit agency, and to support the FTA joint development projects, which is a new project just recently that is really looking, I think, to try and catalyze more of the D in TOD, and not just transit, but also the development that then locates people with immediate access to frequent transportation. So leveraging land, and I'll share a couple of slides quickly. One of the things that we did in looking at this category was some GIS modeling, and this is based on Lane County's property data, pulling that into a mapping engine, and then doing some work to understand where opportunities exist. And we would see this really as the beginning of an inventory that could lead to further assessment and partnerships in two key areas. But the first that I'll just mention is leveraging land and county land. So as we zoom in on, say, from our county view, it's always amazing to see our full county's landscape, but to the Eugene, Springfield, UGB areas, and see a little bit of our transportation infrastructure within these areas, remembering that it is important for people who live in places to have easy access to other places. This mapping exercise allowed us to really quickly just, tabulate that Lane County has 6,642 acres of public land. And of course, that includes, very large parcels like Lane Community College, the fairgrounds, sites over where our new Housing First project on MLK are being built. And 323 acres of that public land is within the Eugene Springfield UGB. That, if I can go back, sorry for just 1 second. Again, we would see this as sort of a beginning point of thinking a little bit differently about how the county considers its property management efforts, and what we would propose in thinking about this basis of county land is that there be the development of that first right of refusal program and property development plan. And the idea essentially is that the county can utilize its capacity as a government organization to both acquire lands, land bank properties, clear liens from properties that may have been tax delinquent and vacant and in foreclosure, and think about then how those properties might be utilized for affordable housing and for housing capacity. As one of the reasons why we're focused a little bit on the UGB components in these mapping exercises, because we would imagine that the fuchsia on this map could increase over time, is that with the new missing middle housing relegalization, the House Bill 2001 law that went into effect and will be implemented by the middle of 2022, there is a different way of thinking about opportunities that are, previously might have just been considered a single family residential parcel, right? All of those parcels will now allow, at the very minimum, a duplex on them, but other jurisdictions have taken the missing middle housing relegalization conversation and really advanced it in the direction of affordability. And the Portland residential infill projects work on what they termed the deeper affordability option that looked at basically what would you need to do in order to create a financially viable path to develop affordable housing on parcels that previously were considered just for single family residents. Those are the types of opportunities that when you're thinking about 8 units at a time, potentially 6 units at a time on a property, we could see being much more interesting to Lane County and certainly affordable housing partners who are looking to increase our capacity and have that capacity integrated in neighborhoods with great access to services and schools and all of those other things. So in the second action category, and others will go a little bit more quickly because there won't be quite as many maps, but I hope we'll still have time to talk. The second action category is pilot and partner. To lead interjurisdictional partnership to track housing affordability, supply, and population change, to coordinate a home share program for Lane County residents. And this certainly connects to what has been learned from Oregon Senate Bill 1045 and thinking about ways of sort of deeply integrating affordability with home share and the multiple returns that are possible if that program is framed correctly. The third of these bullets, YIGBY, is not a typo. This is a proposal for the county to lead a faith community program, an interjurisdictional housing partnership. And YIGBY stands for Yes in God's Backyard. I'll talk more about that in a moment. A pilot program matching affordable housing seekers with low-income homeowners, and also outreach to local financial institutions to support appraisal processes and construction loans and products that will again help homeowners and property owners to add housing units to property that is currently has already been developed. So yes, in God's backyard, to say a little bit more about this proposal. In California, there's a Senate Bill 899 that has advanced through their Senate and is basically a concept of really streamlining and facilitating the development of either underutilized or surplus lands that are owned by religious institutions and faith-based communities. So this is a photograph of a champion of this project from Claremont Lutheran in San Diego on the left, and a site plan of the affordable housing that Claremont Lutheran is proposing on their sites, 21 units of housing, 7 per level. It's a 4-story project next to their church, a 3-story project next to their church. And this is facilitated by Senate Bill 899 in California, but actually also precedes it. So what we looked at in Lane County, again, sort of going back to our mapping and probably get a sense of the interface between these action categories, that this strategy is about leveraging land, but it's also about a pilot program and also partnerships, because there are just 1 acre shy of 1,500 acres of properties that are owned by religious organizations within Lane County, and 532 acres of those properties are within Eugene Springfield. Again, this would be a first level of assessment to understand utilization, and certainly goes without say that this project is really, and the success of it in California is really based on the fact that so many faith-based communities are looking for ways to deliver their mission of supporting humanity and their community through the development of affordable housing and transitional housing. So we just looked at this quick analysis and mapping to understand what is the potential here. How might that capacity be related to other parcels and properties that the county owns? And so thinking about, sort of the housing capacity and land supply, that some of which is hiding in plain sight, so to speak, and that 850 or so acres of inventory, that's a beginning point for thinking about where we want to go. Of course, not all, but most of these properties have, existing uses and current uses on them. But this is part of thinking about how the county wants to steer housing supply and delivery of housing. So again, that we can get closer to the community's needs, because without that steering, we will not get closer. And just zooming in a little bit more and showing you one other view in case your screens, as sometimes I've heard, are having trouble with the differences in values between those properties. This last image just shows the Fuchsia County properties, turquoise being religious faith-based institutions, and the green are existing parks and open space. So 2 action categories together, and then a final action category, looking at programs and strategies that can support skilled trade development in the workforce. This relates back to a point that we made in February about our current labor force working in construction. Of course, the high cost of housing relates some to a shortage of skilled trades and missing capacity within our local development community and building culture. So the first 3 of these bullet points are efforts that would support more capacity in those areas. So looking to LCC and how we can support and build out a more robust skilled trade pipeline from LCC into local employment, to support local design, build, construction partnerships with LCC and the University of Oregon. There are residential construction courses, the U of O Builds program, design build, studios and projects, all of which, with just a little bit of assistance could be shaped to deliver housing and small house projects that could be interim or long-term housing on any number of parcels. And then the third bullet point, to support incremental development and the local building culture. And the thought here is really about how we can learn from grassroots efforts to have more people within this community who are willing to step forward and take on the risk of creating housing and see themselves as a person who maybe has space to add housing on the back of a parcel, or has an undeveloped second lot, or has done a little bit of development in the community but is not sure if they want to continue with that process. And that the Incremental Development Alliance in particular is an organization that Better Housing Together has been working with and wants to bring to this community to support that grassroots capacity. In terms of policy innovation for rural housing, or rural innovation category, this is, as you well know, very difficult aspect of the housing crisis that we face in Lane County, how to serve our rural communities and unincorporated areas, how to deliver new housing into those places. And there are a couple of clear action items that we think could lead to more strategies being identified. One of them is, of course, is to extend the U of O Rare Fellowship with Lane County through next year, and that the idea of that fellowship would be to have a coordinator who is based at the county, who's working to coordinate across different county-wide housing efforts and housing outreach programs. Really important to have that capacity. We spoke with Community and Economic Development and Austin Ramirez and his team and a couple of months ago about this fellowship. And it's just a great program and a great opportunity to have that network be connected and bring people information and potential solutions that they might otherwise feel that they don't have access to or that no one else is thinking about. The second bullet there at the bottom about permanent affordable ownership. And this is to pursue and build out more of the community land trust and limited equity cooperative models. This is the model that Square One Villages has been developing and prototyping, work, of course, in Cottage Grove, and that in partnership with some of the other ideas that we have raised today and that include in the plan, we could see there being efforts by the county or properties owned by religious organizations to really streamline the development process. Currently, projects like Square One Villages projects in many cases still need to comply with multifamily housing standards or planned unit development PUD process in order to site their tiny home communities and permanent stable housing. And we think that there is work that could be done to again streamline and clear that path and make this work easier. The delivery of housing at the smallest scale for people in the community for the long term who have also some of the fewest financial resources available to them. And then lastly, this final point, the piloting of a rural affordable ADU program. This would be learning from a project that we, Better Housing Together, has studied from the Coley neighborhood in Portland. Living Coley is the organization. The Hacienda project is their work. And this is a pilot program to match essentially low-income homeowners with individuals who are seeking affordable housing and deliver an ADU onto the property of the low-income homeowner and then have that unit available as housing. It's builds household resilience, can support equity, and in some cases bring down the homeownership gap and build intergenerational wealth, and of course also is delivering affordable housing units. And then lastly, the last of these 5 action categories to build capacity. This was the question to look at revenue and understand, something about how we might think of new funding in order to accomplish or work towards our housing goals. In the work that Better Housing Together has done over the past couple of years, there's a lot of interest from across our network of partners in, seeking actions, how to say this the right way, seeking actions and revenue generation that do not increase the cost of housing while seeking to reduce the cost of housing, if that makes sense. So to first try to look for all of the opportunities to reduce costs, to work more efficiently, to better utilize partnerships, to leverage land, and then to look for revenue strategies that do not increase the cost of housing. So in those discussions, and we talked about this a bit in February, really 2 and now 3 suggestions. 1, to adopt a new transient, it's a typo there, room tax increment to fund housing and shelter capacity. In doing this work, we've went back and have talked with staff at the county, which has been incredibly helpful, gone through a lot of background on the transient room tax and that history. And I find it remarkable and completely agree that the summaries and executive summaries of engagements with TRT always make a statement about how complicated it is and how hard to understand it is even by invested stakeholders in task force groups. True, and it is complex and complicated the way that TRT currently assembled. However, the housing crisis that we face is also complex and complicated, and we have to look for some new solutions and new capacity to help address it. So this recommendation is proposing to add an additional or new TRT increment of up to 3% to fund county housing capacity and homelessness services per the Lane Code. The TRT, as you all will know, is paid by people who are visiting our community, staying in hotels or short-term rentals often, and this is a strategy that many other communities, and certainly our peer communities across Oregon are now utilizing for housing solutions. Multnomah County's partnership with Metro and the City of Portland most recently to fund homelessness services with the TRT increment. Second bullet point here, to seed a revolving loan fund with reserves. This came up through a discussion with our partners and thinking about revolving loan funds and the importance of having funding available for property acquisition and early stages of new housing construction. In some cases, and then a comment was made that, you know, and I realize this is complex, but that's part of why I'll provide the framing, that of course there are reserves, non-departmental or general reserves that are associated with all public agencies and are a part of fiscal responsibility. And also those reserves are earning almost zero interest at given present time. So the conversation, you know, very quickly got into a pretty creative space, and in follow-up discussions about whether or not a revolving loan fund could be seeded those reserves and what that might mean for increasing capacity. So this is certainly an area that we would want to dig into deeper with the county. We would see this as being particularly effective program related to workforce housing and transit-oriented or mixed income housing projects, and would want to prioritize those types of projects as well. And then lastly, to pursue a county housing leverage fund to create efficiencies and minimize overhead. This is really just a flag for thinking about how it is that these different funding streams can be used effectively, efficiently to deliver new housing capacity and increase the supply of affordable housing in Lane County. And when possible, bringing together multiple funds underneath one umbrella, having multiple application processes that come to the same pool of funding, that those are strategies that many other communities have used to reduce administrative and operational costs associated with getting money out the door in order to create new housing and meet the community's needs. So that is the collection of these action categories and their different strategies and programs. I didn't go into all of the detail over on the right of this spreadsheet and thinking about the speed of impact and the scale of impact with each of these different strategies, but the strategies that I spent a little bit more time talking about are the strategies that Better Housing Together thinks have both the swiftest impact potentially to our housing crisis and also the greatest scale of impact. The lighter oranges that are noted here, that's not to say that these programs and strategies aren't necessary. Some of them are related to planning and coordination and don't directly correlate to a swift, delivery of, many dozens of housing units, but are still necessary in order for us to make progress against the housing crisis that we're dealing with. So not meant to be a, perfect prioritization or valuation over on the right with those different tints of orange, but hopefully useful in thinking about what we might do and where we might go next. So with that, I will stop talking. I don't know if I can see you and also have these slides on the screen at the same time. But tell me what you would prefer, and I'm happy to drive.
Well, I think it's important that you see us when we have questions.
I agree.
So that would be helpful. I appreciate the report. And I think I saw Commissioner Farr's hand up first.
Thank you, Chair Buck, and I'm going to be ever so brief. Karen, there's so much information here. Clearly, you put a great deal of effort into it, and it is valuable, long-lasting information that we need to digest. There are only 3 particular points I want to make, and 2 of them are through slides. The first is slide 2, which is the logos. That's how many people have been working on this with you, and you're the voice of it. And you're making the presentation. It is impressive, truly impressive, the work that you have done. So thank you for that. The second slide I'll point out is slide 9, which is it's the one that's entitled Lane County Housing Permits per 100 New Residents, as the one that has the graph showing the price of new housing. The only thing I'd like to point out on that slide is all arrows on the slide, every single arrow ultimately points to the price of new housing. Much of our presentation surrounds the price of new housing and what can we do about it. The third point that I'll make is another point from one of your slides, is that you're suggesting that Lane County lead interjurisdictional siting collaboration. And that's a question that we as county commissioners and the Board of County Commissioners from now on has to answer. Are we prepared to be, and are we going to be, the leaders in this effort, leading the cities, leading all of the jurisdictions in the county to make certain that we're collaborating on reducing the price of new housing? Once again, a lot of work to be done. I'm not going to say much more about that, Karen, but bravo, excellent work. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Sorensen.
Well, first of all, Karen, thank you so much for the amount of work you've done and the clarity in your presentation. I think all of this is going to be very valuable as the various partners, but especially the county, moves forward to try to implement this action plan. Secondly, I think that the county needs to, and I mean by county, I mean Board of Commissioners, we need to determine how much energy we can put into this and how much money we can put into it as a major partner in the whole thing. And the third thing I'll mention is I really appreciate you highlighting the amount of unused land within the urban growth boundaries of Eugene and Springfield, and in particular the number of churches that are potentially able and willing to step in to have more land that they control available for housing, and particularly for affordable housing. Now, as many people know, in the South Eugene district, we've had a number of churches within the last 5 years basically sell their church, and the land that the church was occupying and the parking lot that the church was occupying has been converted to housing. And that's been a pretty significant trend, at least in South Eugene. I don't know if that trend is present in the rest of the county, but to me, these large parking lots around churches, as well as the churches themselves, in the event that the church is not able to sustain itself, that's a big factor. Now, I'll ask that as a question. Is that something you're seeing throughout the county? Springfield, North Eugene, et cetera, rural parts of the community?
I think a bit of what you're seeing certainly is in response to, I believe it was Senate Bill 1051 from 2017, if I have that date correct, which allowed for religious institutions to add just a couple of units of affordable housing on their properties. And that's, for example, in South Eugene, I think First Congregational Church has one very visible, new addition of a couple of housing units on their property. It's right next to a park, which I think is why people are aware of it. And it's a great example of, that congregation and many others, spent years, right, trying to figure out how they could deliver on a mission that they had to help families, with children who would otherwise be homeless. And what we're seeing from the examples in California and other communities with, larger religious institutions that hold maybe multiple properties, who are seeing, declines in their congregation or have changes in the way people are traveling to church, right? That there are a lot of people who are using other modes to get there, and they have, these very large parking lots that were designed for gatherings of 400 or 500 people that now hold just a couple of dozen cars. So there is underutilized land. There, in some cases, are landowners who have a mission or a desire to see that property used for humanity's good, public good. And then oftentimes, I guess the third component, and this is where the mapping also becomes really interesting, is that these church properties, in many cases, tend to be distributed, integrated in a community, and also with great access to things like parks and schools and all of the other components of daily life that any household wants to have easy access to. So we're very interested to see the steps that were taken with 1051 in Oregon move forward in the direction of California's Senate Bill 899. They allow, significantly more development and an incredibly streamlined process in order for the faith communities to deliver it.
Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Burney and then Commissioner Bozovich.
Hey, Corinne, it's great to hear you, if not see you. I appreciate some of our more in-depth conversations about how you finance this kind of stuff, because that's important, and also about community solar. But as it relates to this, that was such a huge topic with so much, it's hard to get finite. And in so doing, let me just say this. One, I think there were a couple of really good ideas. I want to say that personally, I cannot think of a better use if we were going to increase TRT to deal with affordable housing and homelessness. And I can tell you there are many, many, many entities at that door that will disagree and will look out for their own interests as it relates to that. I've not heard of the notion of diverting a part. I'm saying this, you didn't, a small part of a public entity's reserve accounts, especially if they exceed the floor of where they need to be at. I would, for creating a revolving loan fund, I believe I also shared my ideas with you about a revolving loan fund and how that could be structured and recycled to incent actually private home building. And I think that would be significant and huge. I also think it would be interesting if we ever did discuss that, to discuss a collaboration of multiple public budgets in Lane County that could create such a fund. And I then would like to get into the weeds of that, but this is not the place for that. I want to applaud the idea of looking at who has property and might be inclined to develop. I would like to add, in addition to churches, school districts own a lot of property. And I've heard one school district here, their superintendent, discussing the need for workforce housing for teachers and teachers' family, for their workforces. So I would ask you to incorporate that into your thinking, which is beyond mine. I also think that we are going to see the decline of a lot of commercial properties. I think we're already seeing it with malls, and looking at how we reuse those and perhaps develop housing with those, and how we could structure that might also be worthwhile incorporating into your already full quiver. And I guess the only other thing, because everyone wants to talk, the only other thing is, Corinne, I do want to question where you got your data that says the average annual wage in Lane County is $48,000. I'm looking at something that tells me the average annual individual wage in Lane County is $23,000. And that the average, I don't know who's right, that the average, the average annual for those people that have two-person income earning families, that average is $43,000. So, which paints even a more dim picture than what you did with your data. So I just want to point that out. I think we need to look at that data, and I'd also like to dissect it a bit further. When you talk median and averages, oftentimes that is skewed so high up by people making like top 1%, or it's skewed down by those making essentially nothing. So I want to understand that more, but I feel you and we are now at a point where we're getting as far as we can go without getting anywhere. And we really, I can't wait to have you identify your top 1 or 2 or 3 proposals for action. I very much look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you, and thank you for the comprehensive report and the various categories. As I got to look at it and digest it, the one thing that struck me up front though is for 10 years as I've been a commissioner since the Occupy movement, we've been asked to look at county property for everything from homeless camps to redevelopment as residential. And we have pretty exhaustively looked at our county-owned properties. And I just don't believe that is a large potential as a cure for this problem. If you look at the pink on that site, it's everything from our MLK Commons is identified there, which is already being developed, to our Delta Public Works yard, to property we own along Danabo that has basically old log ponds and it's all wetland, or the Golden Gardens ponds, where you can't really redevelop ponds into housing. You see Armitage Park in there, and there's conflicting use. Even the jail property is identified as pink on that map. So I'm just not real confident that we have much leverage there. So just knowing how much we've looked year after year for trying to find those things, that's just a tough place to go. The one place there may be potential is our property in Glenwood that we hope to eventually move out to the landfill with the transfer site, but even that has all sorts of cost and other restrictions in trying to get a new interchange put in on I-5 and everything else just to make it available. So it's 10 to 20 years out as being available. So just a little bit of caution about that map as being maybe a little optimistic. What I kind of didn't see in the plan a little bit, and kind of am wondering if we, as we're talking to partners and all that, one of the real issues is supply and cost of land. So I didn't see a lot about, relooking at our buildable land supplies and expanding UGBs, and trying to get supply of land in there readily available for residential development. I haven't heard anything about the city of Eugene finally making ADUs available as they were mandated to by the state. That just, Springfield, has fully, endorsed that, and it's actually breaking down barriers and doing the things. And that's the other piece I haven't heard too much about is, removing the zoning and code barriers to that missing middle housing. And that happens not at the county level because we don't have control of zoning and code inside UGBs and city limits. That's got to happen at city levels. To, you know, whatever they can do to reduce the time it takes to get from initiating development to actually having people move in, and cost. And having been in that business for a good part of my career, I can't, you know, when you start talking about having to do a plan unit development for tiny homes, that is a huge, lengthy, costly thing. It's one of the reasons why we don't see very many of them, PUDs. It's one of the places to get the missing middle, because you just about have to use that to get around just doing standard single family subdivisions, is to do a PUD. But PUDs are a whole extra year-long process ahead of even getting to starting into some of the construction and permitting processes. So, you know, that, you know, getting those codes changed to where you don't have to go through a PUD to do townhomes. You don't have to go through a PUD to do zero lot line development or to go to micro homes. You know, that sort of thing has to happen. And that, to me, is a much longer term solution in some ways, where we don't, you know, and one of the things we have, you know, that I do like in your thing is the land trust idea, because it gets back to things that I was familiar with. My first home I bought was an interior row home, not the end row home, in an area where I paid ground rent. And ground rent, you know, is basically that land trust idea where somebody else owned the land, and that's why my house was cheap. And ground rent wasn't that expensive. I think it was $99 a year on my row home. But I didn't actually own the land under my row home. Somebody else did. And that enabled the ability of that to be a lesser expensive row home. And that's, you know, enabled me during a time when the prime rate was over 16%. So that, you know, there was another driver in housing costs at that time to get into the housing market. And it was because, you know, I had that missing middle style home, a row home, with ground rent. So we need to be innovative there. I do want to say I really appreciate Commissioner Bernie bringing up the redevelopment of commercial properties. That has been a major trend nationally, that retail space is becoming more and more vacant. And now office space under COVID is suddenly people are realizing work from home is possible, which, by the way, is driving a desire for higher square footage houses as people are staying home. Suddenly the houses get smaller and smaller with every month of stay at home they're involved in. It's kind of like boats get smaller as you stay on them.
It's exactly like that.
Yeah. So you know, there's some opposing force there, but the redevelopment of those properties, and this gets back to local zoning code, the ability to do mixed use development without having to go through a plan unit development process. To be able to do like they've done in downtown Springfield, where they now have apartments over retail space as they redevelop some of those buildings right on Main Street. You know, if we could, you know, take some of these commercial properties and allow residential development to coexist with them, it actually makes the commercial more valuable and more viable at the same time as providing those front doors in a missing middle sort of situation. I mean, that's, our cities used to grow up that way as mixed use. And we kind of got away from it with this idea of zoning for single purpose. And we just have to kind of break a lot of those barriers down. So thank you, Commissioner Bernie, or Vice Chair Bernie, I should say, for bringing up commercial. And we should think of that beyond just retail, but also office, and getting those co-located you know, housing, like we're doing with our redevelopment of our 6th Street property, which, by the way, is also showing up as pink. But our Market Commons development is mixed use, with residential low affordable housing being located above retail. So really appreciate the report and just look forward to doing whatever we can to make the supply increase so that the price will come down of all housing.
This is a great discussion. I think you have done a wonderful job with giving us kind of a preliminary of what a final report would be that's really catered to what the county can do or has, you know, jurisdiction over or influence over, and what we can advocate for all over. I really feel like the county is in the best position to be the one to kind of advocate and compile and move forward with this huge issue that is facing all of our cities and unincorporated areas. I don't necessarily like just focusing on the metro area. I really want to see what we can do in our rural locations and smaller towns and cities, even though I know that that will look very different. But I look forward to having some discussion on that too. All the items that you've listed, including that long sheet, which I can't read yet. I look forward to seeing that in the final report so I can read that. And really see this as a first step, and then going forward with, okay, how do we prioritize some of these and move forward with the ones that seem most viable? We know that not everything will work at every point in time. There just may be times where maybe the legislature has provided an opportunity for one of the items, but on others, maybe not. And where funding sources come from, I know that's just a huge issue. We only have so many resources, but when a resource comes available, we could look at this list and say, okay, that fits that need and move there, and be flexible about it. And then look forward to figuring out how we can then go about implementing some of these. So what do you need from us to move forward, or the next steps you see that we can do?
Well, first of all, thank you all for those comments and this discussion. It's great to hear your feedback on the work that I think, Chair Buck, to your point, and Vice Chair Burney, that the distilling of, you know, this whole collection of actions into maybe even another set of priorities, or a top 3 or a top 5 actions that we think that, you know, could begin work immediately. That is easy to do. There's a lot here, and I want to clarify relative to the GIS mapping of properties, that part of that is to identify opportunity, but it's also to observe opportunity and to think about how, once we are mapping and able to visualize certain relationships and properties relative to other opportunities, or a longer term view of how the county's property management department or program works, that, you know, that's an incredibly powerful piece of the analysis, and then identifying, you know, where or how the county might want to move forward on particular properties or with particular properties in the future. So I would say that, while to clarify one comment from Commissioner Bozevich, absolutely, that there are many properties that are currently designated and are public county land that are in this map, and also to think about relative to the missing middle conversation in communities, and other goals that we have in other plans around permanent supportive housing and inclusive community development, equity, pollution, and greenhouse gas reduction, the whole list, right, of different priorities and objectives that we're trying to work towards. This kind of mapping is necessary to really do that work and identify where the best potential lives. So we do see it absolutely as an inventory that's a beginning point for that continued analysis. And you always lose a lot of land from your largest possible inventory when you start looking at constraints. But everything that we're dealing with in our housing crisis is a constrained issue. So the challenge we have as a community is to move beyond those constraints or think through how we might translate those challenges into opportunities. And it might not be this year, it might be part of a 10-year plan or a 20-year plan. But that's Better Housing Together believes incredibly important work for us as a community to be planning for implementation with that kind of a long view. So I think Judy and I have talked a bit about how this summary can be packaged into a final report, and then we would very much appreciate the opportunity to sit down and talk more about the logistics of moving forward with some of these different strategies and pilot programs. There's a lot of potential, a lot of enthusiasm, curiosity, plenty of people who are interested in engaging with these issues, and also limited time. So we want to be sure that we're putting the right team of people together, and then have a plan that can move forward swiftly and hopefully be measured to be moving in the right direction a year from now.
Mr. Burney?
Thank you, Chair. Corinne, I wanted to mention one other thing that I realized has not been mentioned. Yesterday, I sat in on a call with 360 some people across the country looking at the state of opportunity zone investment, what it's generated, and a big chunk of that. And again, Lane County has, I think, 4 census tracts that are designated opportunity zones, 2 in Springfield, 2 or 3 in Eugene. But my point here is this: opportunity zones are a haven for capital, private investment. Whatever we do publicly is going to, a little bit will be public finance projects. A good amount is incenting private development. And I just wanted to share that opportunity zone funds, there are multiples of them with well over $60 billion that are looking for places to build multifamily housing. We have census tracts that qualify that in our community, and I don't want you or us to lose sight of that opportunity as well. And I happen to know that there is some very serious investigation going on right now as it relates to that for our community, and it has nothing to do with all of this discussion that we're having. It's just moving capital, and I don't want you to lose sight of that. That's another opportunity we have, and anything we can do on the public side to incent or enable large capital investment to create subsidized and affordable and market rate housing, I think we should also incorporate. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, Chair. Look, was that an orchestra I just heard? Because Commissioner Burney, you were speaking music to my ears. Thank you.
All right, wonderful discussion, everyone. Thank you again so much, Karin and Judy, for the help with putting this all together. We look forward to the final package, sort of say, and next steps in our next discussion. We know this is an ongoing issue, so bound to have yet another discussion to keep it moving forward. Thanks again.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
With that, we will move on to item 8B of our agenda, which is order 20-08-25-02 in the matter of opportunities to cease honoring General Joseph Lane as the namesake of Lane County, Oregon. And with us is Devin Ashbridge, our Public Information Officer.
And Chair and Commissioners, I'll just make a brief introduction, and then Devin will walk through the report that you have in front of you. This is a response to a request from the Board of Commissioners, an assignment that you asked for us to look into the renaming or rededication, the potential renaming or rededication of Lane County, given the historical context and concerns of our namesake. So Devin will walk through various components, the legal analysis, the history of Joseph Lane, potential processes going forward. And then you'll have three options, one of three options to select. And that's what we're looking for you today, from you today, if you're prepared to make this decision, or if you want additional information. But the three options are: one, to direct staff to move forward with a task force focused on making recommendations regarding the renaming of Lane County. So changing the name from Lane County to some other name. And it's important, and Devin will walk through this again, but I'll just say that option requires a vote of the public, because it's in our charter that says that Lane County, the name of Lane County, the name of our county will be Lane County. So to change that, it requires a vote of the public. The second option is to direct staff to move forward with a task force focused on making recommendations regarding the rededication. So I just want to make a distinction that there's been reporting in the public about renaming Lane County as one option, which is going from Lane County to something else, which requires a vote of the public. Rededication would be keeping the name Lane County, but dedicating the name to some other person named Lane. And that is an action that could be taken by the Board of Commissioners. The third option is to not do either of those and to just leave it the way that it is. So I just wanted to lay that out and be really clear. I think the board understands that, particularly for the public, to understand that those options are available to you. And we're really asking for the board to give us direction on one of those three options in moving forward with the task force. To ask the task force to determine whether or not we should rename or rededicate is a significant policy decision that our feeling is that it's best placed to come from the board to decide you want to do renaming, rededication, or none of those. Then form a task force to further look into the potential options for renaming or rededication, and then come back with that. But the broader policy question of which path to pursue initially is really a critical one for the board. So I'll stop there. You'll hear that again from Devin, but I just want to set the stage and create some clarity on that. And I'll turn it over to Devin Ashbridge, our Public Information Officer, who, along with Jeff Kincaid, has done some really great, significant, detailed analysis work to present to you now.
Thank you, Mr. Mcallister. Chair Buck, Commissioners, I will quickly go through 4 areas before discussion. You had previously asked questions about the historical context of General Joseph Lane, legal requirements for renaming or rededicating Lane County, proposed structure for a community-based task force, and educational opportunities that could involve students and youth here in Lane County. So first, the historical context, and as Mr. Mcallister mentioned, a big thank you to Jeff Kincaid, who's an analyst here in County Admin. He has extensive experience in research and stepped up to help with this portion. We chose to rely on source documents as much as possible. And the pandemic did create some interesting challenges. Not all the documents that we would have wished to review prior to this discussion were available. However, we feel that what was available is adequate to answer commissioners' most basic questions. So for a little bit of context on General Joseph Lane, he was appointed as Oregon's first territorial governor by President Polk in 1848, so long before Oregon became a state. He served as a governor until June of 1850, after which he served as a delegate to Congress until Oregon became a state in 1859. He first served as an Oregon senator from 1859 to 1861, and then unsuccessfully ran for vice president in 1860 on the Democratic Breckinridge ticket. He spent the rest of his life after that on his land claim in the Umpqua Valley, where he had no active part in politics that we can discover. There were 5 questions that we asked ourselves to answer in this research. The first was, did Joseph Lane own slaves? The answer, according to the source documents, is that yes, Joseph Lane owned at least one slave. He was given a Modoc Native American boy who was approximately 10 years old in 1850 by someone referred to in the documents as Chief Joe of the Rogue River Indians. The boy had reportedly been captured in a battle between 2 tribes and somehow ended up with Joseph Lane. The second question we asked is, did Joseph Lane own slaves after slavery became illegal in this country? The answer is no, although that comes with a caveat. He did hold an apprenticeship over a young child named Peter Waldo, whose father had passed and whose mother could not be found. That practice, although technically not slavery or referred to or thought to be slavery at the time, is now recognized as slavery under another guise. The third question we asked is, did Joseph Lane advocate for slavery? With limited access to source documents, this question was more difficult to answer. Many resources reference his pro-slavery stance, but because we could not look at source documents ourselves, we don't have a definitive answer on that question. The next question was, did Joseph Lane advocate for secession? Again, it was challenging with our lack of access to some of what would have been key source documents in the state archives and held by other collections. Many resources do reference his sympathies towards secession due to his Southern roots. He was originally a Southerner before being appointed the first territorial governor of Oregon and heading west. The final question we asked about Joseph Lane is, did Joseph Lane participate in violence against Native Americans? The answer is yes. Joseph Lane led actions of violence against Native Americans. He was appointed, as I mentioned, the first territorial governor of Oregon, and part of his duties as governor are outlined specifically to organize the government, protect white settlers and settlements, and manage what was then called Indian affairs. And certainly there are examples of battles and violence done under that guise toward Native Americans. So we do believe that although we couldn't access, again, all the documents that we typically would have in order to bring this report to the board, and that it does answer commissioners' basic questions regarding Joseph Lane and his history with slavery and history with Native Americans. The next thing that we looked into were the legalities of both renaming and rededication. As Mr. Mcallister mentioned, the power to rename Lane County is held solely by Lane County voters. The board does not have the ability to rename Lane County as a board action. As a home rule county, Lane County claims the right to name itself under our home rule charter. Chapter 1, Section 1 states, the name of the county as it operates under this charter shall continue to be Lane County. And as we know, any changes to the charter must be approved by voters. They cannot be made unilaterally by a vote of the Board of Commissioners. The power to rededicate Lane County does seem to lie either with the Board of Commissioners, or it certainly could be put up for a vote of our residents. And again, for the purposes of this conversation, rededication means keeping the name of Lane County and identifying someone more suitable given today's values after which to name the county. The Oregon Revised Statutes are mute on this point of rededication. There's nothing in our charter that would prevent the board from making that decision, but again, it could also be put up to a vote. I will say renaming existing counties has not been common practice in the United States for many decades. There was a point in time at which it was very common. However, there are 2 more recent examples that we looked to get a sense of what has occurred in other communities. The one probably most familiar to people would be Miami-Dade County. It was known as Dade County until 1997 when voters did approve renaming it Miami-Dade. I think that came after 4 or 5 other failed votes under a variety of different names. That does not appear to have been renamed as part of looking at the historical context of the people after which that county is named. References are mostly limited to recognizing that Miami was a very marketable city for tourism and tourism dollars and wanting to capture that in the county name. The most recent example of a county name change that I was able to identify is Oglala Lakota County in South Dakota. Prior to 2015, Oglala Lakota County was known as Shannon County after an individual who, like General Joseph Lane, has a troubling history in regard to treatment of Native Americans. Voters approved that name change in 2015. And then that name change was ratified by the state, an element which we don't believe would be required should Lane County pursue renaming. It is interesting to note that Oglala Lakota County is a very, very small county in South Dakota and actually outsources most of its administration and what appear to be its statutorily required services to a neighboring county. It's encompassed entirely within the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. So the mechanics of the name change are likely different for multiple reasons. Rededication of counties in the United States does appear to occur more frequently. However, because we believe that, like in Lane County, it's not required to go before a vote of the people, it's a little harder to quantify. A well-known example of rededicating a county is Washington's King County. King County was originally named in honor of William Rufus Devane King, who was vice president to Franklin Pierce and was a Southern slave owner. In 1986, the King County Council voted to rededicate the county to honor Nobel Prize winner and civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. So there are certainly contemporary examples of both of those changes happening in counties in the United States. In your board packet, we have a fairly detailed proposed task force structure. It's written in a way that sets the task force up to function should the board choose options A or B. So you'll notice some areas are highlighted for that reason. We believe a community-based task force, should the board want to move forward with either renaming or rededication, would be an incredibly important resource in determining how to move that forward. The task force would advise the board on matters relating to renaming or rededication, solicit input from other community groups throughout Lane County as appropriate, conduct the educational opportunities for Lane County youth as directed by the board, provide proactive research, and produce a final report to the Board of Commissioners that includes that research as well as a task force recommendation, again, either toward renaming or rededication. Our proposal is that the task force would have a maximum of 11 members, but not fewer than 7. It is challenging to keep a group small enough to get meaningful work done while incorporating all voices. So we've also proposed that the task force meet a number of requirements, including having at least 5 members who each represent one of the 5 commissioner districts. That would help us get both a rural and a urban voice on that task force. Up to 5 at-large members whose place of residence, as long as it's within Lane County, does not matter. And then 1 county commissioner nominated by the board chair and approved by the board to also sit on that task force. We also propose that the task force include representatives from community groups advocating for underrepresented populations or who are part of an underrepresented community. Again, that rural and urban mix. We would want to make sure that we have tribal governments represented on the task force and at least 1 member with historical research. That experience, regardless of which direction the board would choose to pursue, should it choose either renaming or rededication, would be valuable. There's a much more detailed outline of draft bylaws as well as draft application forms in the attachment to the board packet for your reference. We also proposed that task force members should live within the geographical boundaries of Lane County and be at least 18 years of age. The final area that we were asked to look into was a proposed educational opportunity. That was a matter of quite a bit of discussion among commissioners in the June meeting. And given that teachers are under an incredible amount of strain right now, trying to adapt their curriculum to an online format, the effect of the ongoing pandemic on schools continues to shift and change. We felt that it might not be feasible in the near future to ask teachers or schools to incorporate this into their curriculum. However, we have 16 school districts with 20-something high schools, a number of private high schools, charter high schools, and homeschool students who are juniors and seniors this year and who are looking for scholarship money to fund their education past high school. And so our proposal is that part of the task force's responsibility is setting up a scholarship opportunity funded by Lane County for high school juniors and seniors across Lane County schools or homeschool. That once the task force has potentially narrowed down its options for either renaming or rededication, could solicit essays or research projects in which students research the option and provide a written product to the task force. And then the top 3 submissions could receive some scholarship funding as selected by the task force. So that's a way to engage and encourage youth participation in a meaningful way, but without placing an extra burden on teachers and schools right now that are struggling so much as they try to move into the new school year here in a couple weeks. With that, I welcome any questions from commissioners, and I'm happy to provide any additional information that I can.
Any questions or comments? Commissioner Sorensen.
I was looking for information about, and I mean specifically legal information about who Lane County is actually named for. I think there's been an assumption that it is Joseph Lane, and I certainly assume that. And there's a painting of him in the Lane County Courthouse. But do you know, Ms. Ashbridge, of whether it's not cited in the Lane Charter that I'm aware of. Is it cited somewhere else that Lane County is in fact named for General Joseph Lane? Or is that just an assumption that we've made? And is there any thing that would say that Lane County is in fact named for Joseph Lane?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, you are correct that the charter does not identify General Joseph Lane as the namesake. There are references through the Oregon Geographic, I apologize, I always forget the name of the state committee.
Oregon Geographic Names Board.
Yes, thank you, sir. That is indeed what we are named after. Part of the challenge, as I mentioned earlier, in not being able to access all the source documents does mean that we don't have a document that I can present to the board that says, yes, indeed, this is what we are named after. However, we found nothing that would contradict that, and quite a bit of information predating this effort that does specify General Joseph Lane as our namesake.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate the recommendation for the task force, and I do support that. And at appropriate time, Chair Buck, I'd like to make a motion on that, but I just want the discussion to unfold. The other thing I'll add is that one of the things that that has been suggested to me is that Lane County might be renamed. Oh, sounds like we don't need to rename it, but we need to rededicate it. And the 2 names that have been suggested to me, and I guess we could make it in honor of both of them, would be Harry Lane and Lola Lane. Now, Harry Lane is more famous than Lola Lane. Harry Lane was a doctor who who was the grandson of Joseph Lane. He got his medical education in the East, although he was born apparently in Corvallis, Oregon. He got his medical education in the East and opened a clinic in Portland for people who could not afford medical care. He later ran as a reform candidate for mayor of Portland. He then got involved in the suffrage movement, and he and Lola Lane, Mrs. Lane, were involved in the hosting of a first suffrage convention in Portland on the topic of women being able to vote or should be able to vote. He then was elected to the U.S. Senate, and among the things he did there was advocate for enforcement of treaty rights of Native American treaties and protection of Indian sovereignty. And last but not least, the cost of changing the rededication of Joseph Lane County to Harry and Lola Lane County would be low. And I would offer the idea that we could do that by board order in the interim while this task force is assembled and while it's working. I think it is important that we change the namesake of Lane County. And there's a lot of complications in doing that to another name. I recognize that. That's why I support the task force. But we could also take this step in the meantime to signal that we are open to changing the name. We don't know where this is really going. We don't know what it would cost. We don't know the benefits. I've had civil rights leaders tell me that they really are ambivalent about this, that there are many more important things. So I don't want to overemphasize the significance of it. On the other hand, wouldn't it be nice if we could just say, hey, Harry and Lola Lane seem like the best lanes that we could name this place after in the meantime, while we really dig into whether there's a need or not and what the implications are for a change. Thank you.
I feel like we're skipping a step because it was my understanding that the committee was supposed to be formed to do the pros and cons of either renaming or rededicating. And there would be a variety of people that are involved in that. And we haven't asked the community what they want. We haven't asked our tribal and Native American communities what they're interested in yet, one way or the other. And maybe it turns out, like Commissioner Sorensen says, they're ambivalent and it doesn't matter to them. That's information I would want to know. It's pretty significant to change a county name. And without having discussion from the community about it, I feel very hesitant on just making a decision on their behalf. I would like to see the committee review the two options. The third, I think, of not doing anything is not a good option, but at least review the options and tell us, the community, tell us what they would like to do before we made a decision. Commissioner Burney and then Commissioner Farr.
I agree with what Heather said. I'd like to add some other things. It is true that the United States government violated treaties, stole land from indigenous people. Get that? Some of us
Commissioner,
have.
we can barely hear you, sorry.
Is that better?
Much.
Hey, I don't know what buttons to click, but thank you for letting me know. I would have just drifted on. Agree with what Commissioner Buck said. I think there's a couple of steps missing. Acknowledge, as we all, I'm sure, do, that the United States government back then violated a lot of treaties and stole land from indigenous people, period. Devin, in your research, I heard you talk a lot about slave ownership. In your research, can you tell me whether the Kalapuya tribe practiced slavery?
Chair Buck, Vice Chair Burney, we were not tasked with researching anyone other than General Joseph Lane. However, we recognize the importance of any research moving forward, and that's why we recommended that at least one member of the task force be an experienced researcher or historian in order to answer questions like that.
Okay, and here's the answer, yes. So I really agree with the chair's point. A step is missing, and I look forward to that input. I also agree with what Commissioner Sorensen said. I don't agree with it. I've had that exact same experience where there were people that have weighed in with me that are members of different historically excluded groups, and the input I've received, for what it's worth, is they would rather we commit to action. I wrote, commit to action to work toward full employment, equal employment opportunities, and living wages for all Americans, regardless, and Lane County citizens, regardless of race, creed, color, or gender, et cetera, as it related to shelter, et cetera, as it related to going to good schools. So I just wanted to point out that, so I'm with the chair on that. And I'd also like to say that I, for one, think that there was an assumption in saying that our desire to look at educational opportunities in this regard related to changing, modifying, or adding to curriculum. I still want to hold that up there, and I don't want to relegate it to sort of a marginal little thing, nice little scholarship, doesn't really do that much. I think I'd like to also, if we do that missing step, have that conversation about what could that opportunity look like. I like scholarship ideas, but it would be very cool if there could be a debate competition amongst high schools in the county, pro and con renaming, pro and con rededicating, and the winners of those debates perhaps could debate in front of the Board of Commissioners, and it could be SA2. It does not have to impose that much on teacher time. And I think with a small amount of resource, teachers and students could be compensated for any costs attached to that. So I think we have two issues that need more discussion and more work. That is my opinion. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Farr and then Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Good discussion so far. I'm responding predominantly to your suggestion, Chair Buck, that we're missing a step. And I think a task force, should we decide to move forward with one, could first determine whether the name change or rededication were the appropriate course. And then the same task force could continue the work beyond that. The first part could be a relatively short time frame. I love the idea of high school students getting involved, and I would love the idea of Kalapuya High School in Bethel being the host site for it. Thank you.
Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. So quick question, Devin, and I don't know if in looking at the some of the research you did on renaming, rededication, answered this or not, but does renaming impact official records like birth certificates or property deeds? Would they have to be redone?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Bozovich, that was challenging to answer. I don't believe that past birth records would need to be redone. I, however, was unable to get a satisfactory answer from Miami-Dade County. Unfortunately, the name change happened long enough ago that all the staff I talked to, both in the county and in Florida State's Vital Records Office, were unable to tell me. And since I don't know anyone in Florida that I could get to request a birth certificate from pre-1997, they wouldn't look one up for me, which I understand. So it was challenging to answer. It doesn't appear that that would be the case if we rename, but certainly moving forward, there would need to be changes in a number of state agency records, not to mention local records, property records. The mechanics in changing the name of the county are quite extensive and impact not only Lane County government, but the numerous nonprofits and quasi-governmental agencies that share the name Lane County as well.
Yeah, it would seem to me a lot of private entities that have their incorporation papers listed as in Lane County might have to change at least their incorporation papers. I bring that up just because, you know, we had an extensive discussion yesterday during Budget Committee about costs during the COVID crisis. And I just want to say that I jumped into this with the idea of rededication, not renaming. And there's a significant cost to renaming. And I just stayed up front that that is the direction I'm leaning. But I do believe it'd be great to have a task force to maybe get into that, to get definitive answers on what cost would happen if we did rename, rather than just, you know, to have the time to go beyond what your individual and this short-term research has been able to do. You know, answer a few other questions about Joseph Lane that I'd like to know. Like, I understand that he also advocated for excluding freed slaves from the state of Oregon. I also understand that he never lived inside the boundaries of modern day Lane County. He actually settled in Roseburg. So, you know, we're actually honoring someone that never lived here. So, you know, I would love to understand a little bit more about that, and, you know, have the opportunity maybe as COVID lets up to get to those papers and research. But I want to state one thing categorically right now. No matter which direction we go, I do not want to do this by board action. I want to have a public election and let the people decide, because I think that election will be very important discussion for the people to have, where we won't forget about the history of Joseph Lane. It will actually be discussed countywide, and we get the support of the people to make any change, whether it's rededication or renaming. I think either one has to go to the people. And we have the ability as the board to refer this to the people for action rather than taking direct action ourselves. I think it's really sad that King County's renaming was done on a split 5-4 vote of their council, you know, and it didn't have the support of the people, you know, to back it. You know, how much more powerful would that have been if they had referred that out to the people and it had been voted on by a majority of the people rather than a split council? So those are my thoughts. I like what staff has brought forward as far as moving the task group or force or whatever we call that, and the composition in the memo. And just want to say that I hope that as we get through this, no matter which direction we go, we get the people involved in a vote.
There's several. I think I had Commissioner Burney next, but and then Steve Mokriski, and then Commissioner Farr.
I'm happy to wait, so I can wait till you're done with your discussion, but I do have some comments.
I'm happy to wait too. All I was going, I'll just briefly, I think Commissioner Bozovich.
Microphone again is doing the same thing. Oh, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
I agree with thank you again. Without the chair, you would never hear me. Some of you might not appreciate that, but I agree with Commissioner Bozovich's points. I think that whatever route we take, we need to understand the economics of that route. Because ultimately, if there were no economics and we did the right thing, I would think we would name it Calapooya County. But there's other considerations. And number two, I agree that this should be put to this should be a citizen decision, and that I don't think that's just kicking the can down the road. I think that's actually important. And that also, by the way, greatly facilitates the educational component that we were discussing.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. I just wanted to state two things. I hope the task force can consider whether Abraham Lincoln lived in Yachats or in Newport. No, seriously, I'm looking forward to Commissioner Sorensen's motion regarding how to move forward with this. And as far as the putting it to a vote of the people, I do certainly agree with that. As long as information is forthcoming regarding the cost of actually renaming the county as opposed to rededicating. Thank you.
Mr. Mokahowski.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate the desire for the board to have more feedback from the public and understanding where the public is at. I will say that what we're looking for is some focus and clarity from the board regarding which of the, and I'm hearing that there seems to be a desire to do something. So something is better than nothing, but also a desire not necessarily to make a decision today, or for the board to make the decision about renaming versus rededication. If that's where the board is at, and I would say, again, our feeling is you're the governing body of the organization, elected representatives of the county. And I think it's going to be a real challenge for us to have a task force of a handful of individuals as broadly representative of some certain areas of the community as they may be. They will not be completely representative of the community, as 11 people cannot be representative. 11 volunteers cannot be representative of 360,000 people. So if the board is not interested in creating that clarity around which option to pursue, I would suggest that you either do a vote of the public, an advisory vote, and ask the public which they would prefer, renaming or rededication, or at the very least, we do some sort of survey that is more broadly representative of the community than a task force. What I'm saying is, typically when we form task forces to do work, we don't give them the large policy question. The board gives them some direction and says, we need more money for parks, or we need to figure out a way to deal with herbicide spraying in the community, or we need to deal with this concern about large events. Help us figure out a path to solve that question. They're not given the question about whether or not we should solve that problem. They're given the question about how to pursue a process or a path towards some more specifically isolated area that has more focus and clarity. So I just want to offer some caution there that if we do a process and the board's expectation is to ask a small group to make this larger policy discussion, it is going to require it'll take a lot of time, and it'll require a lot of resources. And the other caution I just want to offer is that we all know we're in the middle of this global pandemic. That is a priority. We also know the other priority that our organization, the board has stated, is more broadly around racial equity and identifying programs, services, policies within our system of government that need to be changed. We know that there are inequities in our healthcare system, in our recruitment and retention systems, and other areas that need attention. And so the more time and effort that we spend on sort of resolving this primary question about renaming or rededication, inevitably will take away from our ability to focus on those areas. So I know that's contrary to the tone of the discussion, and I'm not trying to create that conflict, but I just want to be honest about what is going to be required if we don't get direction on renaming versus rededication. I would advise you not to ask a task force to do that work. And I'd advise you that if you're not prepared to make that decision, that we pursue some other course it's either a vote of the public or a broad survey to get the feedback that you feel is necessary to aid you in ultimately making the decision on the course.
I just want to clarify that I did not intend in my comments to suggest that the committee make a policy decision on that. Specifically, it was to bring back to us as a board the pros and cons of each of the decisions. I too agree that placing such a huge policy question on 11 people would be a little much. But I do really like the concept of the committee and the different people in which they represent and different groups in which they represent to give that feedback to us prior to moving forward. I really caution us with moving forward really quickly without adequate resident input. Any other comments? Commissioner Posevich.
So I'll just state, and I'm probably a minority on the board. It would be my preference if the task group just looked into rededication. I don't believe renaming is a direction we want to go cost-wise for the county at this time during COVID. I think rededication is a much more viable option. And that has always been my thoughts on this, that we should look at rededication. Complete renaming is going to be a massive problem, and I do not think it will have broad support in the community.
Commissioner Burney.
Is there a proposal on the floor right now?
Not yet.
I want to propose that staff come back with a more rigorous analysis of the pros and the cons of each of the options available. And that at that time, that's my proposal. And that at that time, we would have the information that the chair said is important, which I agree. And we would determine whether we wanted to, how we wanted to structure something, if we wanted to put it to ballot, do a survey, what have you. I myself lean towards an advisory vote of the public, but that's me. So my motion, very simply, have staff come back with an analysis of the pros and cons in terms of time, cost, diversion of attention of each of the options put before us.
Mr. Mcallister.
So I heard that's a proposal, and if the board would like to move in that direction, I'd ask for additional clarity. You have a 20-page report that's in front of you that we had numerous staff spend significant amount of time on research, analysis, and evaluating what we could based on the information that's available to us and the analysis that we're able to do with that information. The cost implications, the pros and cons, the historical context, the legal outlines, and the options. So I would argue that this 20-page document in front of you lays that out. If you don't feel that it does, then I'd ask for additional clarification about specifically what you would like us to provide in addition to what's already been provided to you.
I would argue that one thing that has not occurred is touching base with different groups whom this would affect. And perhaps in one page, we could have a recommendation of cost and time attached to pursuing any of those options. And I'm done. If that doesn't, there's not even a second for the motion, but I'm done.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. I'd like to second Commissioner Burney's motion.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor by Commissioner Burney and second by Commissioner Sorensen. Can you clarify your motion one last time?
I don't know. I will try. My proposal is that this board have, after staff touches base with a variety of interest groups, provide this board with a pro and con for each potential action. My understanding is those actions are to pursue renaming, to pursue rededicating, or to do nothing. And then at that time, this board can determine how we want to proceed.
Commissioner Sorensen.
So the reason I seconded this motion is I agree. I think we need to get off dead center, and this does that. It's not, the answer, but is an effort by this board to grapple with what I think is a pretty significant issue. And if we have our staff touch base with the Equity Advisory Board, and we have our staff touch base with our organizations in the community that have indicated some interest in this topic, and come back with a recommendation or a report that will allow us to further debate it. And I was going to make a motion that we just rededicate the county to Lola and Harry Lane, but I don't want to do that because I believe that there's some important learning here that the community needs to go through about coming to grips with how we honor apparently Joseph Lane by having the county name for Joseph Lane. I also think that there are some significant costs and legal issues involved, and if we do go down the renaming option as opposed to the rededicating option, then we'll have to address those. But in the short term, just having a little bit better idea of which direction we're going would be a big help. And that's why I second the motion. That's why I think we should approve it. And that's why we should have that direction be given to staff, and then come back in a month or two and see whether we want to move forward on the rededication option or the renaming option. I won't be in favor of the do nothing option, but that will be left up to the staff to recommend.
Devin.
Chair Buck, commissioners, should this motion move forward, it would be so wonderful to have each of you provide me with a list of some of these organizations and contacts that you have in mind, so that, again, should this motion move forward and we come back to the board, we aren't missing a voice that you hold as important in this conversation. Something maybe similar to what the board provided to county council for the redistricting conversation would be incredibly helpful to make sure that we bring back something of value to you.
Thank you. I'll just say that I would support this motion because I think it involves the people that we haven't asked yet, including our BIPOC community. And perhaps we can add or discuss a deadline for giving lists of folks that we would want to make sure we touch base with before we met again. Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. I think one of the places that we need to get feedback from is our financial folks and get some rough estimates of cost of what a name change would cost, from signage that Public Works maintains out on our roadways to our letterhead for every department to our business cards, as well as finding out through legal counsel what official documents would have to be changed and what impact of cost it would place on the private sector if we do a renaming. I think that understanding that impact and cost is a missing part of this equation. And I don't think we even have the vaguest idea of how much it would cost not only Lane County government, the private sector, other agencies within Lane County, and then the state of Oregon in having to change everything they have dealing with Lane County to any new name. So I would really like to have that kind of information come back. If that's part of this motion, then I will support the motion.
Commissioner Berney, and then Commissioner Farr, and then Mr. Mcallister.
Yes, Commissioner Bozovich, that absolutely was part of the intent of this motion. Could you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair Buck. I was just going to ask for Mr. Mcallister's interpretation of the motion and what it would take in terms of staff time and length of time it would take. I'll say that I was originally encouraged by Commissioner Sorensen's earliest comments regarding this subject.
Well, I guess I'd first say, is it okay? I'm sorry, Chair. Is it all right if I go?
Yes, please.
Okay. On the first comment about financial considerations, we do talk about the financial considerations under Section D in the memo. We don't call out specifically what the cost or the estimated cost would be. And part of the reason for that, and so I just want you to understand, it's really difficult for us to quantify. We can have our financial staff look into the cost to Lane County as an organization. You know, we'll have to come up with the number of signs that we have that we're responsible for changing, what the average cost of changing those signs are, business cards, letterhead, all of those things. So, we can come up with some number for Lane County as an organization. What we're not going to be able to do is the other areas we've already identified are other governmental or nonprofit agencies like Lane Transit District, South Lane Fire District, Lane Fire Authority, Lane Electric Co-op, Blatchley Lane Electric, all of these organizations, as well as private businesses that are named Lane. I don't know how we would go about determining for each of those organizations what the cost. So we can give you some estimate of what we think the cost for Lane County government will be, but inevitably that will not be the cost to the community for a name. I just want you to understand that we'll give you what we can give you, but there's some information we're just not going to be capable of acquiring and determining for the entire community. So that information will be limited. In terms of the motion, I think that's fine. We'll reach out to the organizations that you all suggest, the ones that may be obvious to us and others that you suggest, and ask them for their list of pros and cons on the three options, and we can report that back to the board. We can do some additional financial analysis with the caveats that I just articulated, that there are going to be some huge holes in our ability to determine the true cost to the community, because we just don't have the capability of determining that for everyone. But we'll certainly do our best to respond to the questions that the board has asked.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Farr.
Just to state that it would be relatively simple and easy for us to do a rededication, inexpensive for the public and inexpensive for Lane County. Subsequent to this, boards in the future may consider renaming, but a rededication seems relatively simple, would achieve a great many objectives, and really would take far less time, far less consternation, and far less debate.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Berney.
I absolutely agree with what Commissioner Farr just said, and the intent of this motion, whether it passes or not, is to go through a process so that no one can claim that we didn't solicit input. And part of that input is going to be an economic analysis of the various options, which will lead to an action.
Okay. Any final discussion? I don't see any. We have a motion on the floor. So I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. We are into the noon hour. We do have one item left, which was announcements from our county administrator. Do you want to do that now, or you want to move that to the afternoon?
I'll defer to your preference there, Chair. I'm happy to wait till the afternoon if you'd like to break now, or I can go, either one.
Why don't we move that to the afternoon and we can go for a break? All right, we are in recess.